That problem all my life.
See, you should remember it. Occasionally, you get
Right, my apologies for not starting at 5 o'clock in the dark, but obviously there's a lot more people than what we actually thought there is when it's done. Hope everybody's got a seat and they're all sitting comfortably. Yeah. Right, I shall read out the evacuation procedure for the certain members of the public, etc. who might not know what's happening. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs and do not use the lifts. Outside the building, please gather outside the Yorkshire Bank on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door by which you enter the room or by fire exits, which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need any assistance of evacuating the building, please let yourself know to a member of the staff. Please also make sure your mobile phones are turned off or set to silent, and have to advise everybody that all or the part of this meeting will be recorded for future broadcast. And if anybody's got the time to go onto YouTube and watch these meetings, they've got a lot more time than what I have. So best of luck to you, we're going to do that. Right, item number 2, apologies.
Chair, Councillor Wilson is delayed because of an accident on his route. He hopes to be here in the next few moments.
Okay. I have 2 substitutes. Councillor Grimp-Pomfret has been substituted by Councillor Makia Rodkin. I'll get that wrong for some reason, I don't know why. And Councillor Tracy Shepherd has been substituted by our well-known super sub, Councillor Chris Watkins. Right, item number 3, the minutes are 28th, 26th and 22nd of August, 28th of June, 26th of July, 22nd of August, and the same name was 2 records over there.
Move that, Chair.
Okay.
Do that, Chair.
Right. You might need to go after declarations of interest that are not on the schedule.
Yeah.
Councillor Wilson, no.
Apologies, Chair, stuck in traffic.
All right.
Agenda item 6, Chair. I work closely with Carver as chair of the Hilltop and Caldwell Partnership Board, but it is down on the schedule of interest.
Okay. There's we have a public consulting.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Declaration is that I'm the vice chair of AXA multicultural group.
Thanks, Councillor. And item number 5, public consultation. What you've seen the agenda in front of you, the 2 speakers for the public consultation intend to speak on most of, not of all the items in front of us. So what I'm going to suggest is that when the items come up, I shall ask them to come forward and speak accordingly, rather than trying to jiggle everything about and try to. I think that's probably the most sensible way to do it. And if by the of the panel's pleasure, could we take the integrated performance report, I know this is number 13 on the agenda, could we actually take that first, because we've got quite a few officers here who are who can, because it's part of the process. We have tried to ask the authors of the report to actually be here, so we can ask some questions rather than saying that somebody else is wrote this, etc., etc. So we can take item number 13 first, and then the officers will leave us at that point and give us a wee bit more oxygen than we think. And is that fine?
Yeah,
Panel all right with
Yes,
that, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, integral performance, item number 13. Who's going to lead off on this?
I will then, Chair. We haven't agreed beforehand. I'm not sure if it's the first time you've seen this version of a report, or maybe the second time. It's relatively new, but essentially it covers a similar material to the previous report, albeit perhaps more succinctly. Rather than talk through the report, suggest that if we go through page by page, and if members have any questions between us, we'll endeavour to answer them.
Okay, there's in order to do that, I believe 2 members of the public wish to speak on it. Shall we have the 2 members of the public first, and then listen to their comments, and then deal with the report afterwards, page by page if necessary. Right. Councillor Parker.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting lumping the whole thing, all 3 scrutiny panels, onto one. So we've now got a massive amount on this report. So obviously I can't pick out much in 3 minutes. What I did particularly notice is the Civic Hall getting more expensive again, £711,000. And we are supposed to have done various things at the Civic Hall to bring the costs under control. And it's been mentioned before, things seem to have happened to put more money back into the budget for it by some back door. But £711,000 is an awful lot of money. We've repeatedly suggested we actually look at running the bar and things privately, so that some entrepreneur could actually open it when it's got customers and things like that. I'm not a great one for privatisation, but £711,000 is an awful lot of money. We also have markets and parking and things. We've looked, the cycle race that came through the day in the next quarter will actually increase the income for parking and get some more tourists back into town. But we do have an awful lot of things to do. And I'm shocked that the council is still very dependent on the over income from planning applications. We are taking in something like £250,000 more than expected because of the planning applications, because of the planning by appeal. And this isn't money that's going to last, because as soon as the market turns, we've got a borough plan accepted, or we don't have a borough plan accepted, this rush of large planning applications will end, and that cash cow will go away. So I think we're on really thin ice. We really need to look at a sustainable future, and actually depending on this rush of planning applications because of the incompetence over the borough plan is going to end. Thank you.
Any point of clarification for the councillor in the panel?
You said that the budget was being adjusted through the back door for the Civic Hall. Can you explain that?
No, I'd like the officer to explain it because
You made the comment.
yes,
So I just want you to explain what you meant to the panel.
in the report.
No, listen. I want you to explain what you meant by back door. What are you insinuating?
I'm saying that the budget has been adjusted and they're not doing what was approved at the time of budget setting in February. Please ask the officers.
No
Okay.
clarification.
Okay. Right, Ian, do you want to If the panel finds that's the easiest way to do it, to go through page by page, obviously, we're on agenda item number 13, and it's page 91. So, if anybody wants to ask any questions as we go through, perhaps that would be the best way to deal with it, and perhaps some of the questions that Councillor Condicor brought up might be relevant from one of the pages. Okay, Ian.
Okay, we'll start on, Chair, it won't necessarily be the answer in the question.
Okay,
so we
yeah.
do it in the most appropriate. Page 93. Perhaps we take page 94.
Through the chair, would you like me to answer some of the comments that have been raised by Councillor Condicor?
If you're yes, Paul.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. I would like to point out that the final column, which indicates a £19,920 overspend, is actually a forecast as at the present financial period. Some of that £19,920, the actual figure as of today for the record is £25,019, and I can give a full and detailed breakdown should the group wish me to do so, but primarily the majority of the amount comes from the increase in equity charges for the pantomime, which has increased the pantomime budget by 5,000, and also by extending at public will the service at the Civic Hall, because it removed from a bistro and moved back to a coffee bar. That has actually attracted a 19.7k increase in the budget. So with the greatest of respect to comments that have already been made, we're looking at nearly £24,000 worth of expenditure, which we actually have no control over, and we do actually have to provide as part of providing the service. I would stress that it is a forecast variance, and I have every confidence in my team and the management at the Civic Hall that as over the last 2 years, the financial forecast for 16-17, we made a £72,000 saving against estimated budget. In 17-18, we made a £13,500 saving against estimated budget. And I have every confidence in my team, Chair, that the 2018-19 budget will be a minimum of a balance, but I would hope for in excess of a £10,000 registered underspend by the end of the financial period. I do actually have some statistical information which I can hand out to members for information.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. The Cabinet report, which went last Wednesday, said in the strategic performance report there about and all it said was enhancements to the Civic Hall Bistro offer compared to the budget which was set in February 2018. So, Councillor Condicor and myself are both actually correct in saying, because I said this at the Cabinet the other night, is that we are not operating to the agreed budget that was set on budget night, because there was a saving which was built into the budget, and we are not making that saving. So we are not operating to that budget, are we not?
The reason why there was an underspend that wasn't identified at the time of that report, which was the salary cost of the catering supervisor, and that was an error of judgment on my behalf.
So we aren't operating to the agreed council budget?
But we will make it up through increased income as a result of the public consultation exercise, which requested the Civic Hall to provide a service over and above what was originally agreed as tea, coffee, cakes and biscuits.
And also, if I may, Chair, the budget also, and the Cabinet report which went the other day, also indicated that there was a drop in bar revenue. Is this coincidental, or is it have you noticed a correlation between that and the 5p increase on all the charges which was put forward in the budget on budget night in February?
No, the main respect to the correlation is that during August we're actually in a shutdown period, so we have no shows at all during the August period.
Did you have shows in the August period last year? No, we don't have any shows during the August period.
So you're still down against what you forecast, so there is a decrease compared to last year.
That's because the budget profiles are worked out over a 13-month period, and there are peaks and troughs within the Civic Hall income stream, and the majority of our income stream is from April through to June, and then from October through to January.
Well, that trough should have already been built in. If that is a known trough, that should have been built in the underlying baseline, so we are not operating again to budget.
The underlying baseline is a corporate baseline, and it's not based on each individual service.
Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Chair. I want to drill down actually into some of these additional spend pressures, particularly the 19.7 thousand extra for the additional service that's been put, as Councillor Wilson has already said, against full council approval. But I want to sort of drill down where that figure comes from, because in effect we've amassed a £19.7 overspend in that particular area in just 4 months. Now, those costs, how does that 19.4 come about? Is that going to be an ongoing cost? Are we expecting then, that's 1/3 of a year, for example, are we expecting another additional cost? Is that a fixed cost, or is that going to be an ongoing potential?
In answer to that question, at the time of the report being drafted, the tea, coffee, cake and business scenario, biscuit scenario for the coffee bar was going to be manned by casual staff. When the offer was extended, it was appreciated that we needed to have a catering officer with the appropriate qualifications to be able to provide that level of service. And as such, that is the salary cost, including the additional on cost. So rather than it being staffed on casuals, we now have a qualified catering officer who is carrying out the duties and responsibilities to comply with the health and safety regulations.
Any other councillors? No?
Okay.
You want to continue?
Page 95. '96.
Sorry, apologies, we'll just go on to 95 for my Chair. Development control, we seem to be doing far better at the moment in the forecast variance. I read these figures. Is there a particular reason for that? Can we expect that to continue in the future, or is that a specific turn at this moment in time?
The reason for that overperformance is because there has been a significant number of major planning applications over and above what we forecasted. We have looked ahead to the future, and particularly the adoption of the Borough Plan will be a significant landmark. But we do expect to continue to receive major applications in numbers after the adoption of the Borough Plan for a while. Then, of course, after a short while, things will revert back to a more normal situation. But it's certainly not a case of there being a cliff edge at the end of this financial year.
If I may, Chair, but surely that explains the upturn in planning policy and applications, rather than the item above in bold, the development control.
Development control is the planning applications function. I think that planning policy and applications, I think I've picked this up before and asked for it to be amended because it is confusing. It should simply say planning policy. And that variation is due to staff vacancy.
Thank you, Chair.
Continue.
Page 96. '97. '98. '99. 100. 101.
Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Chair. I can see that there's a substantial difference here between the occupancy rates between Nuneaton and Bedworth markets, with the trend as a sad face for Bedworth. What are we doing to try and perhaps improve that, and to try and up the number of and up that performance?
Happy to answer that one. Jonathan White. We have actually made some improvements in relation to Bedworth Market. externally and internally. The existing stalls were static in place and difficult to keep clean. Those have been removed and replaced with pop-up stalls which give us flexibility in terms of space. As a consequence, the first quarter's figures, we were averaging, not including the static stalls around the perimeter, 38 stalls a week across the 3 markets in Bedworth. Currently, we are now averaging 52. We did a relaunch at the end of July, and that's had a very positive impact. I think partly because we're now, one, the place looks better, and we're actually doing a lot more in terms of positively promoting, one, the cost of the stalls in there, which are very affordable, and two, actually promoting the market more actively with the market traders as well. So that seems to have had a very positive impact. As such, we will be projecting a forecast figure in line, if not exceeding, budget for the end of the financial year.
So, if I may, Chair, so you're quite satisfied that those perhaps figures not necessarily being quite where we'd want them to be are all as a result of perhaps market downtime with the improvements?
Yeah, I think they were really sort of, like I say, that those figures are reflected prior to or as the changes were taking place. The changes were complete by the end of July. We did a relaunch as such then, so obviously these have been the first quarter where we sort of cover prior to that, and we've seen that not turn in the last sort of 2 or 3 months. What we've seen is that it's attracting certainly more of the craft type trader as well, which is something that maybe makes that market slightly different to the Nuneaton market in terms of its profile as well, which is great because we probably don't want the two trying to compete with each other. So there's more work that we're doing there. We're looking at options for, now that we've got more flexibility with the space, using it on Sundays and trying to drive revenues from encouraging other types of activities there, maybe auctions, car boots, who are always looking for sort of hard standing and covered premises during the winter months where they can't trade in the fields, etc.
Finally, if I may, Chair. Thank you. And are we doing anything particularly with sort of using the market store now we've got the space for one-off events? I know, for example, some areas do some lovely farmers markets and French markets, etc. throughout the year, not just towards the festive period.
Yeah.
Are we exploring those? Have we got any ideas?
Yes, we are. We're speaking to a couple of companies, one of which delivered the food festival for us in the summer months. They're interested, like I say, in taking a view in terms of the car books over the winter period, but they also do food festivals, craft markets. There's also another external company that we're looking at who operate at the World of Adventure, the Farm World of Adventure over by Warwick, and they do children's markets, craft markets and various other stuff. They're also equally interested now in coming in to see if they can start trialling some of these niche markets in there as well. The opportunity of working with an external company is obviously as well we can bring them in while not looking at actually making any impact on our own costs, and actually charging in the long term or presenting a revenue opportunity for us as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Good news. Anybody else? Yeah, 102. 103. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the commentary about the geosensor, I just wondered if we could be given a bit more information about how that will work, because I understand it's going to be used, from the commentary it says it's going to be using mobile phone signals anonymously. I think that's something we need to make sure we get across to residents, if there's any signage that it's done anonymously or whatever. Is it going to be monitoring where they go in the town, how long they stay in the town? Is that all data you can capture from that to give us some more like shopping trends of how long people do or do not stay with in town?
Yeah, I mean it is. This is the state-of-the-art technology around football counting or measuring visitor numbers. The geosense system works by picking up the Wi-Fi signal from a mobile phone. Your phone is always polling for Wi-Fi, and these sensors are able, which we've got 9 around the town centre in Nuneaton, and we've got sensors also in Bedworth, so we've got both towns there. It can then differentiate between individual mobile phones. It doesn't know whose phone they are because the numbers are scrambled immediately, the MAC addresses, and it's just given a random identity. So it can then tell, as you quite rightly say, how often that particular phone is seen in the town centre, and then within the town centre, when it goes through sensor 1, where it next goes, which sensor it's seen on next. So we begin to get some information around patterns of movement around the town centre as well. So where particularly useful is obviously understanding where people are first seen, and then where they go in terms of their secondary and third sort of visits from there. But giving us patterns that we haven't had before in terms of the numbers coming in. I mean, it was useful for the OVO event, for example, to see how many of the total visitors that came, which I measured at about 3 o'clock, and it was about 18,000 people we'd seen. But we could determine from that, about 6,000 of those people, a third of them, we hadn't seen since the geosense system had been in, which was 3 months prior. So we can now actually determine unique visitors from repeat visitors, and it will give us a lot of information to really begin to understand our town centres and how people use them.
And moving on, thank you, Chair. Moving on from that, I think that's really a positive step forward to actually see how things are moving. But historically, in these reports, it's always been Nuneaton town centre footfall. You just mentioned that it's also in Bedworth.
Yeah.
Can we, and perhaps this is the recommendations take forward, Chair, look at how we can incorporate Bedworth footfall into the report? I think it'd be interesting as well to see what the trends are in comparison and how many new shoppers are coming into Bedworth, what their, and also perhaps in future give detail about what the average length of stay is for shoppers in Nuneaton and Bedworth. I think that would be quite interesting and help form policy as well, maybe looking around, it could impact on car parking charges, for example, about the duration of how people stay in, or about the different types of, if we see, like we were mentioning the food stalls, if we see an increase in that, does that give us an indication that that's more of a thing we should be doing because we're getting more unique visitors in? So I'd like to see more information on Bedworth in particular coming forward if that's possible.
I don't have a problem with that. The more information we have in the town centres and how people are using them is quite a good thing. Councillor Grant?
Yes, I just wanted to find out if there's any way to quantify what percentage of people that use our town centres have mobile phones or have them active when they're in the town centre. If I'm to understand the methodology you use, it goes by Wi-Fi connections, whereas a lot of people will be using their own mobile data, especially if they're walking through the town centre rather than stopping at one particular place that has Wi-Fi. So, of course, this naturally underestimates these figures, and because it's difficult to compare it to anything, any sorts of national averages at this point, I was just wondering if you had any ideas on how to be able to do that and how to be able to measure.
I mean, there are some national stats about in terms of the figures. I mean, I think it's important to stress with any form of footfall counter, none of them are 100%. Other than tagging people, will never, be able to do that. And
I'm definitely not advocating that.
And traditional counters, they've been criticised because they're laser or what have you, and they actually therefore can't differentiate about individuals or individual devices, and therefore multiple count. So what the footfall is beginning to give us is patterns. Certainly the figures sort of indicate that they are the number of people obviously with smartphones is extremely high, around sort of 96% or what have you. So in terms of determining the numbers, I mean the numbers we're getting out of here, for example, I can give you the average number of visitors on a weekly basis in Nuneaton is 110,000 is what it's picking up, and in Bedworth 43,500. So, when you look at those figures against the figures that we were getting from the road walk, they would appear to be sort of in line and giving us some decent data.
Yes, and to expand on some questions that Councillor Wilson's already posed, is it possible to measure these statistics in terms of days or weekends and look at how many people we've had on a particular weekend? Because you'd expect a sharp increase in the number of people using their phones, firstly because of the larger number of people in the town centres, but also more engagement, when you've got event posting pictures on social media, talking about what they've done that day. I just think would be very interesting to measure that, because not only would be able to measure footfall, you'd be able to get some idea of how much engagement you've had with the town centres, which is an important factor in keeping people coming back.
Yeah, there are almost two elements of it. One is the Wi-Fi provision, providing the visitors with the option to have Wi-Fi access through the system. And the second is the geosense, which is effectively anonymous. If you've got your Wi-Fi on your phone, it will count that regardless.
Okay.
But the engagement element is more through once they've signed up with the Wi-Fi solution, and they have the option of obviously ticking a box as well to say that they'd like to receive information from us, which will help drive our social media and engage through push notification and email marketing through there.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of larger companies such as Google can measure how much mobile phone usage there are in particular spots. So it looks like we're getting into that a bit.
Yeah.
You know, to
it's
our
going to
best
give us a
ability.
lot more data than we've ever had before. So it'd be great.
Yeah, brilliant.
Councillor Hancock?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a really fascinating project, if I can call it that. And apart from it, some people might see it as Big Brother, but if you don't kind of identify people and it's purely that football thing, it could be a really useful tool. Because whilst we're one borough as Nuneaton and Bedworth, the shopping habits of the two towns are very different. And traditionally in Bedworth, most of it's been done very early in the day, and most people are out the town by lunchtime. And you know, whereas in Nuneaton, it has changed a bit. Okay, we've got the sort of national decline of markets anyway, but in Nuneaton, it looks like it's starting to become more of a cafe type culture, and that we had another new one open recently, and there's a lot more to keep people in the town centre. And so the workings of this project will perhaps help identify, particularly in Bedworth, is how we can keep people into the town centre longer, and how we attract those small independent units, whether they be retail units and which aren't doing particularly well, but if they're the small independent ones, things like micro pubs and cafe stuff. And I think it's a really useful tool, and I think it's quite right that it's been suggested that we can look at it in the two towns as well as an overarching borough issue. Thanks, Chair.
Totally agree with what you say. As much information as we can get, I think, is always a good thing for us to disseminate that down and work out what's the best way that we're going to deal with policies in the future. And if we've got the hard data there, we can actually use that in order to use an evidence-based argument for doing whatever we want to do. Before I bring Councillor Walmsley back in, any other members of the panel? Councillor Watkins?
Yeah, I'd just like to congratulate Jonathan really on everything he's doing in the town centres. It's slightly undersold what this can do. I mean, it can even send you a text if you've not been in for so many weeks or whatever, and say congratulations or welcome back or things like that. So there's lots more things that this can do, and it's a huge leap forward from the footfall count that we used to have in the road walk. So it's all looking good. So congratulations on all the work that's going into the town centres. Really good.
Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, more a comment than a question. It just feeds into something you said before, Chair, and what Councillor Wilson was saying about data and looking at this. And I think something that this could certainly give us, and I think that we should be asking for going forward, is actually a heat map laid over both of our town centres. I think that would be really important for us looking forwards, and perhaps areas of the town that don't necessarily have, of both towns, that get more activity than another, and we can then look at what we provide there and what may go forward. So I think that could be a very useful tool for us as a committee.
Okay.
Also, sorry, Chair, if I may.
Okay.
Just to add to that, I know that a lot of this data is already publicly available through Google. I think it's Open Spaces, something like that. So if there's any possibility of getting that data from these companies, and that might help with overlaying the information that Councillor Walmsley suggested and comparing our data to theirs and getting some sort of long-term pattern.
I mean, the company that we use is just beginning to get into that. They've got, on the headline page there, it gives us a number of areas that they're in. So in Stratford upon Avon, they're in Leamington Spa, they're in Basingstoke, and a number, they're about 30 towns. So what we're getting off the top page of that is not all of their data, but the average number of visitors per week, the average number of visitors per month, average number of visitors per year. And we, in terms of our footfall, are actually the highest performing. We certainly get more footfall than Leamington, we get more footfall than Stratford, we get more footfall than Basingstoke. So it's quite interesting to see that comparison. What we haven't got at this moment in time is how we're comparing, because once we get a full year in, then it really starts to take a different shape, because we're comparing month on year on year, again, you know, in particular sections or months or what have you it is, and we can then start to really sort of understand it. So as it progresses, we'll get even more information that's useful to us.
Okay. Do you have any?
104.
Just on 104, 105 really, there's a bit of the down faces. Is this down to universal credit, or what we're putting this down to, rent collections and things like that?
Thank you, Jim McCafferty. The rent allowance and rent rebates one on page 104, this relates to benefit performance. And it's still within our profile measure of 22 days, but it wasn't as good as the same point last year, and that's hence the sad face. The reason for it in this case, though, was due to an increase in the volume of work. We now have a temporary resource in place, and performance has, at the end of August, improved from 19.36 days for new to 19.36 days for new claims, and for 7.27 year to date for change of circumstances. So that's the answer to the 104. You wish me to go on to the 105?
Yeah.
The 105 one, council tax and business rates collection. This relates to council tax collection, which is considerably down on previous years at the same point. And we can attribute that to the impact of universal credit, insofar as the universal credit now separates the claim for, well, it used to be housing benefit and council tax reduction together. It separates them to the DWP are just dealing with the universal credit bit, and then it was up to the individual to approach us for council tax reduction or council tax support. However, we have reviewed this, reviewed our process, and we're introducing something which we hope will make it a lot easier for residents to make their claim in the majority of cases, by taking an indication if that they make at the DWP when applying for UC, and have that passed on to us, and take that as a starting point of their claim. So we're hopeful that that will cause a pick-up on that activity again.
And of course we'll be talking about that a bit more depth further in the report. Councillor Hancock?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm actually pleased to hear what's just been said about that further assistance that might be able to be given, because there's a recurring theme throughout our agenda tonight, and it's all around universal credit and the massive impact it's having on residents within our borough, well, not just within our borough, but nationally. But it doesn't appear that there's going to be any changes made by government about it. In fact, they're going to be rolling out more and more. Yet, as I say, it's a recurring theme throughout the agenda tonight, and there clearly is an impact on people's welfare and how they can pay their bills. I'll leave it there, Chair, because as you say, there's going to be stuff further on the agenda there, but I think as a scrutiny panel we should be noting that concerns about if we're hard-hearted and say it's the loss of income to this council, but we have to recognise the causes of that loss of income. Thank you, Chair.
We should be dealing with that in more depth.
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
no.
report. And anybody else? Ian?
106.
Chair.
Councillor?
Thank you. Yeah, I was waiting for the 107 bit, but
Yeah, I would get to that. I would get to that. Yeah.
it's both bits, and Chair, I guess it's the sad faces that jump out on us, you know, and there's probably nearly as many smiley faces as sad faces, and in this particular instance, this one should be a massive sad face right across the front of the page. It's actually heartbreaking to see the effect that things like universal credit and other things are having on people within our borough. Our residents, our families that are becoming homeless and having to go into accommodation that isn't really suitable for those types of families. We struggle to accommodate them in the hostels in Nuneaton. Hence the reason for converting the area office in Bedworth to help with that. We have a problem with being able to afford hotel accommodation. We've even had to offer people accommodation as far away as Tamworth. And I'm sorry, Chair, we at some point, I can't see how it can be resolved because of the issues that are causing these things. But it's having a massive effect on people's lives. I recently dealt with a case where a guy, single parent, 3 children, out of the 3 children, 2 were at separate schools in Bedworth. He was working, but had to pack in his job so that he could get them, because he was being evicted, to get them to school. So it meant him losing his work and having to do all that. And another recent case was one, that's how I found out about the Tamworth situation. I didn't know until that arose with me. And it's clearly not good enough. And it makes you wonder what we've become as a society if all these things are impacting so much. When children are affected because of the schools maybe not being able to get to school on time or whatever, the parents can't get to work or whatever, they're having to turn up to food banks to be fed. Even people who, some people that are even in employment through 0-hour contracts and things are still poor, although they're working and have got to turn up to food banks. And until we get a handle on it, and I actually think it's about time the government release some of the restrictions on local government, and we could actually do large-scale house building. In saying that, Chair, there's not a lot of point to that unless sometime they repeal the right to buy legislation. You know, because lots of places are building affordable accommodation, but then they get bought up under the right to buy. And all governments have been guilty of not repealing that. I believe it should be repealed. It's why we've got no council housing for anybody anymore. Chair, I've said it before and I'll just say it again so it's clear to people. I've always been opposed to right to buy, but I don't blame anybody for doing it. They'd be daft not to. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Watkins?
I understand a bit about it, but if you could just for the other members around here explain the duty of the 56th day. Please.
Unfortunately, yes, I can. Unfortunately or fortunately. So with the Homelessness Reduction Act came in April. Really what that means is that we now have a duty to prevent homelessness, hence the Reduction Act. So if someone approaches us with a housing need, we have to work with them for 56 days. And in that 56 days, if they need accommodation, we have to provide it. And that's part of the reason why the temporary accommodation levels are going through the roof. I would point out, and I know Councillor Hancock knows this, but just generally, placements out of the borough happen when we simply can't find anywhere within the borough, that we don't look outside first. And where at all possible, when people are placed outside of the borough, we try and make sure it's only for a night or 2 nights, and as soon as we've got somewhere that's available within the borough, we'll bring them back in as soon as possible. So the previous legislation, just for comparison, so the previous legislation gave us 33 days to investigate and make a decision on homelessness and give that decision to the applicant. Now that could have been a number of things. It could have been intentionally homeless, unintentionally homeless, and some of the bits and pieces. The new legislation means that we can't make that decision before 56 days. So even if we've done all of that work, the person still has 56 days. And part of that is so that everyone has to enter into a personal housing plan. And the reason is that the thinking is that within 56 days, reasonably, you should be able to find accommodation. Now, what has been brought in that was different from before is that it's much easier to place people in private sector accommodation, so that we're able to fulfil our duty to house someone in private sector accommodation. That's all well and good, but there are a lot of people who don't want to go into private sector rented accommodation for various reasons. Some of it I can see, other parts of it, you know, we do have a really good private sector landlord section. We do a lot of enforcement work, that type of thing. So really that's it. We now have to work for 56 days before we can make a decision, in the hope that no one or fewer people will be deemed as homeless.
Okay. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to understand, seeing this sharp spike, how much of this we expect to be reduced following the Bedworth area office being converted into temporary accommodation, and how much do we expect the reliance on staying in bed and breakfast to be reduced?
The conversion will provide 8 rooms.
Yes.
So it's not a massive dent, no. But we continue to look at what we can do. We are trying to divert. So as a region, we work very closely, and we are trying to find ways to support landlords to allow people to remain where they are whilst we're doing the 56-day period. So we're trying all sorts of things to reduce this. As I said, sometimes it's clear very early on that we will have a duty to people. So what would be much better for us is if we had enough housing stock coming through to let people have a home. The issue for us is our own stock is reducing, but not only is our own stock reducing, housing associations don't have to operate in the same way as we do. So they are supposed to assist us in our homeless duty, but there is nothing in law that we can enforce upon them. And they are businesses, although they're charities, they are still businesses. And you're aware of the level of rent arrears that we have. They are very much withdrawing from accepting nominations for people who are in receipt of universal credit. So we have even less properties available coming through for us now. So it's a bit of a double whammy. for us on that. So the Bedworth area office won't solve this. What we need is a little bit more temporary accommodation, but a lot more permanent homes coming through.
Yeah. On the same topic of temporary accommodation, are there any sort of, well, not necessarily plans, but are we investigating the possibility of using other little used council assets to bring in more temporary accommodation?
We're looking at everything. The difficulty is it costs a lot of money to actually convert something into temporary accommodation. And it's the age-old argument, we have one pot of money, do you spend it on putting new houses in or putting better quality temporary accommodation? The answer is somewhere in the middle, and we are re-looking at the business plan in the Housing Revenue account at the end of October. The social housing green paper came out and actually said that the high value void payment wouldn't be brought forward. So we've now got to recast what finances we've got available and actually what's the best use of those finances, but that will be done in October.
And of course the costs of staying in bed and breakfast is sort of an ongoing cost, and if it continues to increase, and that, you know, is a lot more, whereas it may cost more in the short term but less in the long term to bring in line more temporary accommodation, although as we said, you know, temporary is just that, temporary, but you know, that's the subject we're speaking on at the moment.
Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Chair. Unlike some others, I actually think the Housing Reduction Act is a landmark piece of legislation and actually allows and encourages council to do much earlier intervention. I've heard for many, many years in my professional role that people are literally being told by the housing authorities, go away, present us the day you're kicked out of your house under via court notices. And I think we need to look and get better at doing much earlier intervention, and which could potentially alleviate people needing to come to us altogether. So what sort of earlier intervention tools have we been looking at as an authority? Have we had anything, for example, mediation services? I know some authorities have tried that and have, although very early, have reported anecdotal successes, perhaps in straightening out disputes potentially between a tenant and a landlord and kept them in that private accommodation. Have we done anything, for example, where a number of households may be able to find recurring payments for rent, for example, but don't necessarily have bulk amounts up front for deposits, etc.? So are we looking at anything about deposit loan schemes that some authorities are doing? What are the early intervention works that we're trying to do in order to stop people having to come into maybe these temporary accommodation and ending up on our sort of ending up literally on the doorstep as they are physically thrown out of their property?
Right. Just to clarify, I don't think this is a bad piece of legislation. It's very time consuming, and we've had to put more staff in to deal with it. And obviously we have had, I mean, this is the biggest change in homelessness legislation for many years. And it's a complete 180 in terms of the way you deal with homelessness. So it's been a long road to get heads around that and sorting things out. The other thing I would say is we have never said go away and come back the day you're evicted. That has never been anything that we do. We never have done. And actually we have led the way in prevention stuff, certainly across the county, for quite a long time. So things around mediation, rent deposit schemes, landlord support, we've been doing that for a long time, for at least the last 8 to 10 years. When I came 10 years ago, we put a landlord liaison officer role in, whose main focus really was to liaise with private sector landlords. How can we help you? Do you need support managing your tenants? Do you need support with your property? How can we help you? So we've always done that, and we continue to do that. We've got mediation. That's not just between a tenant and a landlord. There are often times where, unfortunately, you'll have parent remarries or goes into a new relationship, child doesn't get on with new partner, tensions, and child is often kicked out at 16 or 17 years of age. We have access to mediation, sort of family mediation, to try and assist that as well. Of course, we can't force people to undertake it, but we do that. We've got good links with social services as well. In terms of those things, we work really closely with Doorway, St Basil's, P3, you name it, we're involved. So we have led the way, and we continue to look at that. We've got the rent deposit schemes. We were even one of the first to introduce rent deposit schemes for single people. So prior to this Act coming in, largely single people, we wouldn't have a duty to house them. They wouldn't have been classed generally as vulnerable or any sort of priority category, so they'd have to go away and sort themselves out. We were one of the first to put in a rent deposit scheme for single people to basically guarantee their deposit with the landlord to help them into that accommodation. So I would say I'm really proud of what we've already been doing, and we'll continue to look for new ways to bring new measures in wherever they present themselves.
And are we doing anything with people and their finances? Because I know that one of the things that particularly can cause issues in the private sector generally will be coming into rent arrears. What schemes have we got in place maybe if people actually approach the council at the time when they're struggling? And I know there are many reasons that people may not necessarily want to admit that they have financial problems, and that they can appear much later down the line, and yes, there are times when that may not be possible to work at that point. But those that maybe are looking for early intervention with issues with finances, have we got any advice sections that we're doing? Are we giving any planning, budgetary planning to try and stop and either maybe stop rental arrears continuing to accrue, or perhaps looking at ways in which we can even stop it and begin to pay, have rent arrears start to be repaid as part of the process as well?
All of that. We have financial inclusion support officers, and we have had those for 3 years. And they work not only for within the housing revenue account, so for those tenants, but they also work in the private sector. I might have to bring Jim in, but I know that we've recently been successful with the county to get some money from the county for community financial inclusion officers. And I'm looking at Jim because he might tell me I'm wrong. And what they are there for is actually to be placed out in the community where we know we do have hard to reach people. So that can be in schools, at food banks or whatever. I don't know, Jim, have you got any more information on those that would be helpful?
Yes, I have. Earlier this afternoon I was talking about it. What we need to do is also not just look inwardly, but look outwardly and find out what feedback from the community, where best to place people, find out where support groups naturally are, and see if we can get invites into that environment. You're quite right, some people are unable to face coming into a council building and address their arrears problem, but are much more readily able to do it on what they regard as neutral territory.
Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to ask Dawn, you mentioned the green paper and the high value voids not being brought forward. Could you just...
Right, so for a number of years, I'm struggling, the Housing and Planning Act 2016 proposed something, I think the name of it has changed, but originally it was high value void. So this was attached to a proposal to roll out right to buy in the housing association sector in the same way that it applies for local authorities. So housing associations already have the right to acquire, but the terms are much less favourable for a tenant, whereas for the right to buy in a local authority, there are massive discounts. You know, we do have some people buying for less than £10,000. That wouldn't happen for a housing association. So the plan was for equity for social housing tenants, it would be rolled out to housing associations. However, the housing associations, because they're businesses, even though they're charities, they would receive money to compensate them for the loss of that asset. And the funds for that would come from councils being forced to sell their higher value void stock. So whatever was classed as higher value, when it became void, we'd have to sell it on the open market and hand the money over for it to be distributed. So that was the proposal that came on scene sort of 2014-ish. It was confirmed with the Act in 2016. The Green Paper has been published and actually saying that's not now going to move forward.
It's not going to happen?
No.
Okay, thanks. Good news.
Mrs. Grace?
Thank you, Chair. I think, one of the things that lacks is advertising and accessibility and people's awareness of what is available. One of the things we've done was a community day quite recently to encourage people to talk about rent problems, council tax problems, because we need to get people to come forward. From first-hand example, there is help out there, but people need to know what help is available, and we need to encourage people to talk and to come as soon as they feel that they're going to start to struggle, is to approach people. And we're all proud, none of us like to admit that we're struggling, but hands up mate, I struggled and I got all the help I could get. And if we can make people aware of this, you're on a winner, because we need to catch people before they do fall. And that is the whole idea of it, is to communicate, get advertising out there, and to encourage people to ask. Don't be ashamed to ask, just ask.
Anybody else? Ian? Oh, sorry, Councillor, I'm looking at that.
I just want to make the point that that's what children's centres used to be very, very good at doing. So, we've got to pick up that.
Yeah, got to pick up the shortfall.
Okay.
Sad.
Ian?
108. Nine.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, going on 108, under the Heart contribution for Warwickshire County Council. I think with this, again, I've had meetings with Paul Coopy and Rob Askew. We need to encourage people to do this. I've actually helped 3 families that had disabled people that knew nothing about this. And I think the advertising of this, again, is really, really poor. We need to encourage people. The money's there. We want to encourage people to have independent living. And again, I'm just going to reiterate, we need to advertise it better.
Ian?
109.
Sorry, I know, so you indicate on the ground.
Yes, I was just going to follow on from what Lynn just said. I don't know if you have any list or anything like that that's available to give advice on the disability.
Yeah, absolutely. We have done, because it's Warwickshire-wide as well, so we have done radio campaigns, social media campaigns, what else have we done? We've done leaflet drops, we've gone into doctors' surgeries. We actually had a meeting with the board a week last Friday, and we were shaking our heads at how hard it is to give this money away. We're just really struggling, so I can make sure that's given out.
If you could leave some in my tray, because I've had a query about what's available at surgery not too long ago, so
just to make sure, and I apologise if I'm teaching members to suck eggs, this is for people in the private sector and not for people in...
Yes, I understand that. I understand that.
110. $111. $112.
Councillor Elliott.
Can I just ask what the vacancy saving is, please?
In terms of cash, I can't tell you, but we have had 2 posts vacant. One was vacant for about 3 months and has been filled. The other vacancy, we had one attempt to fill it and didn't succeed. So we're advertising again. We're hopeful to be able to fill that again soon. In terms of the breakdown within that huge underspend, I can't actually give you the numbers, but the vast majority of that is from planning fees.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the average time to process planning applications, I notice it says that there's no overall target. But would it be more beneficial for, because I've never sat on the old planning one, so, to break it down by the different types of application, because nationally there are guidelines for when you should deal with small, medium and large scale applications, and it might be interesting to see how we're doing against those national indicators as opposed to lumping them all together, because I know, for example, if you don't meet your targets that are set nationally, then you can go on grounds of non-determination, and we have been hit with that a couple of times, and that caused significant problem, particularly with the 5-year housing land supply. But it might be more interesting and more accurate for the panel to see it against the national indicators by type of application moving forward.
The background to this is that there are national targets of the proportion of applications that should be determined within certain target times. And that led to what I think was quite a serious problem within the planning system, in that you could change the process for dealing with planning applications in a way that gave you favourable results, but very much to the detriment of the applicant. So the end-to-end time used by the national figures starts after you have validated an application. So if you're a bit short of staff, you could just not validate the applications for ages, and then you could still hit the target for processing the application, even though the applicant would be waiting far longer than the government targets intended. And there are other tricks of the trade that could be done, and a lot of authorities were doing that. We were doing it to some extent, not as much as others. When we did a lean review of the planning applications process, we clearly recognised we needed to stop that. So the end-to-end time now is from the date we receive the application through to the date that the permission is granted. So it's the end-to-end time as the customer sees it. And that's much more important, we feel, as a performance measure, and that's what we're reporting here. We don't set a target because our aim is to improve constantly. So clearly we haven't improved, we've deteriorated. And that's the important thing, and we need to get back to improving. But behind these figures, the head of planning still keeps a track of how we're performing against national targets, and we are achieving the national targets for major and minor applications. So I can show you that's the case. But I suppose it's a question of, are you happy to put that question to us verbally from time to time, or do you need to see something on a more regular basis?
If I may, Chair, I think it would be interesting to see that on a more regular basis, because if I'm looking at this from the outside looking in, it looks like we've got worse. But I know that behind that we've had a number of large-scale applications, and they will take longer to deal with. And so if you just look at that figure there, it skews it. I don't know whether we're doing good or bad against the major and minor. Could be that we're doing fantastic against both. But on that one, it looks like we're doing worse. Now, for whatever reason, and we have our disagreements over the large-scale applications, but they are what they are. And assessing, well, the biggest we've passed so far is 850. that's going to take a lot longer to sort out than someone who's asking for an extension on a 2 up, 2 down. So personally, I think it gives more of a truer reflection if we have those. I'm happy to put the average in overall, but to give a truer reflection, I think that's a better way of doing it.
Chair, may I suggest that perhaps in the commentary, as a standing comment, we could state whether or not we're achieving the national target for major and minors, and then if we're not, we can provide an explanation as to why not.
Why not? Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Is this also taking into account the planning department deliberately holding back submitted planning applications until a time when they feel that they could be passed, or they have a better chance of being passed?
I'm not aware that that happens.
I've had it quoted to me that there's 2 different instances of that being done.
If you could pass those to me, I'd be interested to look into.
Yeah, well, the 2 of the one that was submitted around March for houses off Burgess Lane and Scrutiny.
I don't think we should be discussing.
I thought this was Scrutiny.
Yeah, but we're on television here.
And the other is School Lane.
And you might be identifying people who don't want to be identified, Councillor. That's all I'm saying. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. I mean, on that particular issue, I've got no knowledge of any concerns being raised within planning about that. Certainly nothing's come through myself. But I'd like to ask Ian, is it fair to say, well, really, with whatever targets that you have, there's always problems with set targets. And under the old system, sometimes because of the nature of either the size of the application or the technicality of it, occasionally you would go over it, and yes, technically you've breached that period of time, but in this authority, the planning officers in this authority and members that have been involved in planning have always taken a certain degree of pride in the fact that it's probably better if you go over the target slightly if you're going to get a quality outcome. And with the old targets, you know, if you were going to stick to them, maybe you couldn't have resolved all the issues within that time, but you've got that pressure on you to hit the targets. Now, even now, there's targets in place that you're meant to do, but any developer, whether they be large or small or a householder, if there's any particular issues around them, in the majority of cases, if we go to them and say, we need a little bit more time to resolve this, are you happy that we extend that period? And the majority of them would be happy to do that because it gives them more chance of a positive outcome anyway, and from our point of view it's likely that you'll achieve a better quality of something. So targets are targets, but again there's got to be some sort of flexibility, and they were quite rigid before, but I actually do agree it would be useful if we could get another type of breakdown of it.
Ian, do you want to give a comment to that?
Yeah, Councillor Hancock is quite right in terms of our approach to planning applications, and certainly since the Lean Review even more so, that we prefer to provide a quality service, even if that means it's not a fast service. But with the very major applications, there's always a possibility that we'll go over the national target, and in fact that's recognised in the government's procedures and in the law, that if there is a very major application, we can discuss with the applicant a formal extension of the timescale, and if they agree to that, that then becomes the target. And in that way, these very major applications can be processed in a proper way without actually breaching the national target on an individual basis. And that's something developers are always entirely happy with, and we are happy to work with them to actually agree a sensible process, timescale within which we can provide a quality service.
Councillor Grant?
Thank you. I was just wondering what, in your view, constitutes as a major development, as in how major a development has to be until you can have those discussions?
Well, it's not down to us. That's defined by the government. It's depending on whether it's a housing application, a commercial application, whatever. There's a definition, and it actually doesn't have to be very big. to be classed as a major application. I think off the top of my head now, I may be wrong, I think it's 20 houses, for example, constitutes a major application. So that's not a particularly big application.
Yeah, I mean, just to be sure, if you could send me that information, I would be very grateful.
On the other matter, councillor, that you brought up, have you got any individual cases that you think has gone wrong or whatever? Please take it up with the officers in another place rather than here.
I'm going through the correct channels.
Okay. Ian?
113.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, commercial property, so or council own commercial property, what is that? And also on the comments, just I don't really think looking to the comment, to be honest.
Okay, so what is occupied council-owned commercial property? Obviously, the council owns property of a commercial nature, and we operate as a landlord, and we trade and make profit from renting out that property.
So is this about shops?
Shops and light industrial units and any other kind of property that we, the craft centre, for instance. So there's quite a wide variety of different commercial properties in the portfolio, and what this is measuring is what percentage of those properties are occupied. In terms of the comments, yes, the comment is very brief, but the target is 95%. Obviously, we have turnover all the time, and that sort of goes in peaks and troughs. Once an occupier vacates a property, we may have to then go and do some renovation work to get it market ready before we offer it to new occupiers. So there's always a little bit of delay in getting it occupied. What I can say is that recently there has been quite a lively interest in our vacant properties. So they do tend to get re-let fairly quickly.
Councillor Wandler?
Thank you, Chair. I know there's quite an interest to get those properties back on. Have you got any breakdown on figures perhaps that vary, as sort of Councillor Watkins touched on before, actually between maybe retail units, more industrial units? Is there any sort of breakdown you can give on that? Because it may be that one sector is performing at 100%, whereas which then may mean another area is much lower and actually needs much more investigation. Because this is obviously an aggregate across the entire sector of commercial, which can be quite a wide term, of properties that we as an authority own and rent out.
What I can tell you is for the retail properties, we have a very low vacancy rate, and certainly not anything compared to the vacancy rate for our town centres as a whole. We're perhaps more responsive than private sector landlords in trying to get those properties re-let, and we'll offer favourable terms in order to enable that to happen. In terms of the breakdown of numbers, we can produce that, we don't routinely do so, but of course we know the identity of every individual property and what kind it is and whether it's vacant or not. So if you wanted us to look at that and provide you with a breakdown as a one-off, we could certainly do that.
Because I just think if retail, for example, makes up a very high proportion of our asset pool, so to speak, and as you've said yourself, the vacancy rate in retail is very low. Well, if that's something up to 98-99%, then that sort of other 5 or 6% compared to the 100% of occupancy must be coming from another sector, and maybe that particular sector then we need to look at what the market's doing. Is it the right time to continue with that asset? Is it worth disposing of that asset at the moment? Is the price of sale compared to rental income, which may also give indications of actually an area of the market that's changing, is less occupied, and maybe we need to shift into more units of another type, which is much higher occupancy rate, and it might give us sort of those ideas and maybe able to give decision makers a greater idea of actually where we should be putting the resource.
So we do that on an ongoing basis as officers. You don't necessarily see that, and when we purchase commercial property, we do have a sort of our risk approach to that is to try and purchase properties where we're confident there'll be a reasonably high occupation rate, so that we don't have lengthy vacancies. But if you'd like, we can certainly produce some figures and you can take a look at those and form an impression.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. Just as a point of interest, really, to ask for a point of interest, How do you classify the NABCEL homes in that? Would they be commercial because they go to a commercial business? And the idea, and I don't know because I'm a director of NABCEL and that's separate to the council. But it just occurred to me when we're talking about the different types, they're not in the housing revenue account, so they wouldn't be considered social housing. We're letting them over to a commercial company to make money. So in theory, you could argue they're commercial.
We don't count those in this figure.
No, they're not included in the commercial property occupancy rate. When we buy a property or make a property available to NABCEL, that is a commercial letting, which is correct, and the arrangement is that it's a proportion of the rent that they achieve from lettings that feeds back in terms of the rent.
I know how that works, but I want about the actual property it's classified.
So when we let a property to NABCEL, all of our properties that we've let to NABCEL are 100% occupied. In the council's perspective, the void is actually within NABCEL, the company itself.
But
and consequently, we don't report that.
I understand what you're saying, but would those should those be figuring into the commercial properties pool and be shown as all that? Because they aren't one thing or the other, really. It's a bit of an anomaly, really.
I think perhaps the difference is the nature of the occupancy. And the figures we're reporting now, they are commercial or industrial occupants as opposed to residential occupants. And that's the differentiation we make. But I mean, it's...
I'm looking at Les, but I'm just wondering if to include it, given that the actual void levels are reported within the company, might look as if it's inflating performance because it's 100% all of the time, because it's passed over to the company. I don't know.
It's just an anomaly which has just completely occurred to me.
Yeah. From the council's perspective, they are 100% let because they let an NABCEL, which is an arm's length company. So you're right, it's no different than if we let to Mr. Smith or Bricks PLC. And whether we need to bring them in, I think there's a discussion perhaps that we need to have about whether we bring them in or because they're residential rather than sort of shops, offices, factory units, retail, whatever. You know, whether we maintain that distinction and report them separately or whether we bring them in within the envelope of all the commercial properties. So I think that's something that we need to have in.
Sorry to put my other director under a bit of pressure there.
Absolutely, I hadn't thought of it either.
Yeah. Okay, 114.
Councillor?
I just want to ask about the salary savings again.
For the housing revenue account. That is almost entirely in our repairs and maintenance service. We are having some real difficulty recruiting tradespeople, so qualified tradespeople. There is a national shortage, I'm sure you've heard about it. We can't compete with some of the earnings that are out there. You know, large-scale housing developments are paying sometimes twice what we can afford. So there are salary savings there. We are currently finalising a proposal that we hope will actually deal with that. Will include some additional apprentices, but it is largely that there's a shortage, there's a skill shortage, and we are struggling to compete.
Councillor Mumbley?
Thank you, Chair. In addition to offering apprenticeships, which is very good that you've just discussed, what are we doing maybe to work with training providers, perhaps that not necessarily going to apprenticeships, but maybe local colleges that are offering courses in carpentry, etc., that maybe not wanted to progress to full apprentices, but perhaps there's anything we can use to partner with those institutions that we can look at going forwards?
Potentially. I think the important thing is that they have to be qualified. So if someone is not willing to study up to a certain level. Whether they want to come into an apprenticeship or not is irrelevant, but they would need to achieve a certain level of qualification to actually be classed as safe for us to work in home.
But for example, might take a course at the college, learning to do brick making, let's take for example. What would be an issue then, for example, instead of as they progress and as the students continue to develop, they would automatically be taught by somebody that is a qualified person? And what are the reasons why we couldn't look at perhaps using real world skills and lessons for them if there was to be, I don't know, rebuilding a wall along a hedgerow or something, if that makes sense, and
Right.
using that as a real world skill as they progress through their education, because it would mean real world skills whilst still being covered and overseen by the qualified instructors.
We would do that. I think that the point is that actually an apprenticeship will allow them to get paid, and we will actually pay for their tuition as well. So for some people, for most people, the apprenticeship is easier.
I'm not just has to be an either or. It could be a dual approach.
Yeah, I do think that, and I wouldn't disagree with you. What I'm saying is our experience is more around that for those types of trades, the apprenticeship is more attractive because they're getting a guaranteed salary and the training paid for them. The way that you're suggesting is we wouldn't pay for their training, so it doesn't exclude them, but people tend to find the apprenticeship route more attractive. And we're not ageist in terms of apprenticeships. You know, one of our apprentices was 25. You know, if we have the relevant people coming forward, that's absolutely fine. We have skills or have experienced skills shortages in other areas in the past. And we do now partner with Coventry universities to take people in their final year of qualification into training posts. So they continue to pay for their education, but we support them and give them a training salary, and they continue on their skills. So it's horses for courses. If we do have people coming forward in a trades sector in that type of way, absolutely we would do that. But we tend to find apprenticeships more on that side, and the training that you're suggesting more on the professional technical side of things.
And I, like many others in this room, were indentured apprentices once upon a time, and all in favour of such things going forward for the future. So good news. Ian?
115. 116. 117. 118. 119. 120. 121.
'Cause that's the end of the report, yeah.
Thank you for the report. There's obviously there's some things that we picked up at the panel. I sincerely hope somebody's taken notes that can be carried forward to the future, including the first report we had on the elasticity of supply and demand from the City Hall, which is, I'm glad I spent 6 months understanding that subject when I was elsewhere. I think it's been the second time I've actually used it in my life. But Tim, you did say there was your further report with further details could you be sent out to the panel?
Yes, no problem, Chair.
Okay. Other than that, we've seen some positive things in this report tonight, including about the footfall and about the various other things that are coming down in Bedworth Town Centre and the Nuneaton Town Centre, and all the other things that were suggested as improvements. I'm sure that will be taken on board and brought forward another end. The recommendations is the panel to scrutinise the performance to the recommendation of the relevant cabinet portfolio holder. I think that's been done, and I think the notes have been taken, so we pass them on to the appropriate portfolio holders. And the second part of the recommendation is the panel is asked to approve the relevant comments entertained to the style and comment of this report. Because if members remember last time, we weren't very keen on the way the reports were submitted last time. I had a look at the reports, and I looked at this different format, and to me it seemed a lot easier to understand. I sincerely hope the panel feels that way as well. And my thanks to the officers for actually indulging us in getting these things out so we can understand what's happening. So that's the recommendations. Everybody in favour of the recommendations? And at that point, I'd like to say those who were breathing in can breathe out now, and those who are breathing out can breathe in now. And thank the officers for their attendance. So you can leave. And don't get killed in the rescue out. So. Right, so we're on to where we were. We're running over. So we'll come back to item number 6, the voluntary and community sector report. Abu, are you taking this, and then we'll ask the 2 members of the public who wish to speak.
Yes, I'm Chair. Yeah. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is just follow the formats that we followed previously with, I think there's some new elected members, so we'll just kind of explain a little bit about the organisations for some who may not know a little bit of background about them. But ostensibly what you've got in front of you is a detailed report for quarters 3 and 4, 2017-18, for the 3 kind of principal organisations that we contract with within the third sector, namely Warwickshire Carver, the CAB and Warwickshire Employment Rights Service. So it's a kind of historical report. We've got representatives from the CAB here, David and Denise, from the management team there, so they'll take any questions or comments that you've got with regards to that part of the report. And then what we'll do is at the next panel we'll have representatives from Warwickshire Carver here to take questions with regards to them. So what I'd like to do is just, again, in terms of background, Warwickshire Carver, that's the kind of first organisation that's mentioned. Their remit responsibility, for those that don't know, is to work with community voluntary organisations across Nuneaton and Bedworth on a whole kind of array of kind of matters in terms of supporting development, governance, funding applications, etc. So they're kind of generally known, and the kind of national term would be an infrastructure body. So we have an office and a kind of base of an organisation here, which is based at Nuneaton Centre, and they cover the borough. And then there's one in each district, so they're a kind of county-wide entity. Then we've got the CAB, who most people, not everyone will know, and then David and Denise are here from the CAB, and Warwickshire Employment Rights Service, who we now no longer contract with, but this is a kind of historical report for quarters 3 and 4, are a specialist employment rights organisation that support on kind of complicated employment matters to residents of the borough, but they are also a county-wide organisation, and they are still kind of co-located with the CAB office in Nuneaton. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through some of the kind of key highlights for those organisations, and what I'll do is then, with regards to the CABs, if anyone's got any questions specific to those, David and Denise can probably take those if they've got questions for the other 2 organisations. I'll try my best to answer them. If not, I will take those and come back to you with responses. So Warwickshire Carver, you've got a lot of the details there in terms of kind of the types of organisations, the types of support that they've been offering. Over the 12-month period, so you've got information for quarters 3 and 4, but over 12 months in terms of their target was to work with kind of 110 organisations. One of the things that we've been doing for a couple of years now is they find that you have kind of 2 elements to that. So they've worked with 87 organisations, but of those organisations they've worked with them on 121 different either projects or initiatives. So that kind of gives a better feel and a better understanding that you might have an organisation come in the same way that you might have a client come into CAB, but they might need help on a number of fronts. So trying to capture that is something that is quite important in understanding how they work and the kind of help that organisations need. So sometimes you might have an organisation that just wants to help with the funding application, but others might need that together with a whole gamut of other things. So they, in terms of their target, it's 110 organisations for the year, so they've exceeded that. In terms of funding, which is another big area of work for them, they, over the year, have applied for over £800,000, of which 250,000 has been secured. And again, with that, again, based on timescales, deadlines, depending on the funder, that money will continue to roll in. So that information will again be updated. And then the other piece of work that Warwickshire Carver now delivers for us, and it delivers across the county, is around volunteer development. So, I mean, that's kind of critical to all aspects of the way in which the third sector operates. So you've got their information on how many volunteers that they've registered, how many new organisations they've registered, and also the new opportunities that have come forward in quarters 3 and 4. And then you see that cumulatively, hopefully, over the year. Is there any questions particular to
No, just
Warwickshire Carver? So I should go through? Yeah?
Could continue, then I'll...
You can take any questions.
There's 2 members of the public.
No problem. And so what I'll do is, again, with the CAB, very quickly, because here, in terms of the information you've got, their targets for the number of client contacts have been exceeded. B was the ward that had the highest number of clients coming forward for both quarters 3 and 4, and a change that has kind of, the 2 areas that stand out really for support are advice relating to benefits and advice relating to debt. But then we can come back to that if anyone's got particular questions with regards to that. And then finally, with Warwickshire Employment Rights Service, they had a very busy end to the kind of end of the year, so their target was exceeded almost by double. It was 1,189. The 2 areas, again, not too dissimilar to the CAB, breach of contract and lawful deductions have always been the kind of 2 areas where they've had a lot of people from the borough coming in, asking for advice with regards to that. And then finally, Campill was the ward that most number of customers came from for both quarters 3 and 4. So that, in essence, is a lot of the kind of key points picked up in the report. There's a lot of depth in there for electronics, obviously. If there's any questions, I'm more happy to take that.
There's, before I bring the panel in, there's 2 speakers from the public. Michelle Condicor, would you like to speak first?
Thank you. I only wanted to speak very briefly and things. I mean, looking at the report thing, particularly regarding the CAB and the Warwickshire Employment Rights thing, the sheer numbers just show that the need that there is for these services. And it's across all areas of the borough. Yes, some have a greater need than others, but it really, there's people from every area needing advice and things. And the return is far, far greater than the cost to the borough. And I'm not just in monetary terms, but in health and well-being. Very recently, I was actually approached by someone who I know sort of reasonably well, because they were having an employment issue and they didn't actually know where to go, and thought that myself and Keith might know where they could get advice and things. And they were really, really pleased with the advice they got and things. But it wasn't just for the person concerned. It's a younger person who, still lives at home, and his mother was absolutely worried, sick over these issues as well. So it's not just even the person that's being helped, It's the family and, you know, around them and things. So I think, you know, I would ask the panel very, very, you know, strongly, please, please, please put a recommendation to Cabinet or Council or, you know, whoever you can, to reinstate the funding for the employment rights, you know, service, because it is so greatly needed. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Any points of clarification from the panel? No. Councillor Conjacor.
Right, thank you very much. I've got 2 asks from you, this panel tonight. The third sector, volunteers, all this stuff is really, really important. This is a poor borough. Lots of people have a lot of time, so there's lots of volunteers, but there's also a massive amount of people in need. So I really ask we give this subject a lot more time, find out a lot more about it, particularly new members, and we asked at the external scrutiny if these organisations could be scrutinised by the external scrutiny, because we have a very light agenda, and it's very unfair on the third sector and these organisations to be squeezed into this massive agenda. They're really, really important. And as you become a councillor for a few years, you get more and more encounters with different problems. Sometimes it's CAB, sometimes it's employment issues, as my wife said, and they're just so, so important. And we really, really need proper scrutiny. So we shouldn't be having them in this ginormous meeting with 40 people and 5 hours meeting. We should take our time and scrutinise and talk to them and find out what they do and listen to some of the case studies, because they're really, really important. The second ask, my wife has already mentioned it, is the employment rights. We have overspent by £19,000 on serving cakes at the Civic Hall. We were giving the Employment Rights Service £11,000. Surely, if we have a tiny piece of money in our budget, actually helping people with employment problems is a far better way to spend money than serving people cakes in the Civic Hall. Cakes in the Civic Hall can be served by private operators. We do it in the museum. It's privatised, the contract to do the catering there. The advice that CAB and the Employment Service, really, really valuable. It saves jobs, saves lives. Yeah, we have a high suicide rate in this borough. We have so many problems and we are not spending enough. So I hope you'll look again at this £11,000 cut. Thank you.
Any points of clarification from the panel? No. Any members of the panel wish to anything on the report? I'm sure that Abu or David or Denise can hopefully back each other up and fill in the blanks, shall we say. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. You'll recall that I said earlier there's a recurring theme throughout the agenda tonight, and it's within this as well. Although I may be repetitive on the particular theme, I think it's reflective of lots of other things. But through you, Chair, I'd like to ask David and Denise just a couple of questions, and also make some points. The first kind of question is to do with page 52 and the category of support. And as I said earlier, the theme throughout tonight is about the problems around universal credit and its implications. I found it quite difficult with the actual numbers. They kind of don't mean anything to me because I haven't got anything to compare them against. But what I wanted to ask David and Denise is, could they give me some sort of indication of the percentage of their workload that's having to be applied to people coming in with problems with benefits, tax credits, and particularly universal credit? And I say that, Chair, because will it be all right to let them answer that and then come back in, Chair? Or would you want me to?
David, do you want to answer?
Well, firstly, let me say that we've been in, and I think that's not always recognised, and sadly, in Bedworth as much as it should be, but we've been dealing with universal credit issues since the start of the rollout, because we also deal with rugby, who are a pilot area. So we have got a considerable amount of experience of giving advice to people and the problems that they have dealing with universal credit. And also we were part of, and we had an hour and a half meeting with the National Audit Office over in Rugby, where they took evidence from us about the issues that are happening, and that was published, as you know, the report that went to Parliament, and there's all sorts of furore about it. Anyway, but universal credit is becoming more and more of a problem, but since it's been rolled out, more and more people are coming into the office to see us for support, both for personal budgeting support, for help with doing applications online, because for many people that's a difficulty, and also that we're finding that once people have got over the hurdles of applying online, keeping in contact with their job coaches, they then find themselves having, because of the change of the way they're being paid and everything, finding themselves having problems which lead to debt problems. So it's a sort of ongoing knock-on effect. And so I would say that 60% of our work is involved in either dealing with benefit queries, not just universal credit, but benefit queries in general. And a lot of that is to do with the changes in disability benefits. And I think you'll see on other bits of the report that over the 2 quarters we saw over 1,000 people who class themselves as being disabled. That's either physically or mentally disabled. So a considerable amount of our clients have difficulties and barriers any rate without having to be faced with all these changes. Now 612 universal credit, that's 612 issues that we've dealt with during the 2 quarters. That's growing. Because as a service, as a national service, so we decided to count universal credit issues separately from, rather than just pushing it into the main benefit inquiry, because we want to see what that effect and what that impact is, and we're reporting all that back to our national association, talking with the DWP, talking with policymakers and legislators to try and get things changed and to try and make the process easier for people. So, as I say, the 2 things, benefits and debt, are interlinked really. And I just want to bring another thing into this as well, because you know the way that I can see how rent arrears and council tax arrears are climbing because people are having difficulties. Now, what isn't perhaps what we don't really show well enough in this, because we just can't figure housing, we dealt with 556 issues. A lot of those issues are people who've got rent arrears or mortgage arrears. And what we do is we try to negotiate with a landlord or mortgage lender to get affordable repayments of arrears that to be agreed, and then for our clients to sustain those repayments on top of whatever else they're paying their contractual amounts by making changes to their budget, helping them make changes to their budgets and the way they spend their money. That actually saves people from becoming homeless, which saves Dawn and her team having a bigger problem because you know the more people will be coming to the door to your door to say, well, actually we're homeless now. So we do a lot of preventative work and early intervention work. Now, Keith's right, really. I could go on about this all night, and I don't think there is enough attention paid on the stuff that the third sector do. But I will tell you that we're raising our profile in November. We're doing the National Let's Talk Money Week. We're actually going to be going out and about in Nuneaton and Bedworth, engaging with the public at markets in Road Walk, in the Bedworth market, and all sorts of different places, up the college, in the library, to talk with people, to local people, to show them the range of integrated money advice services that we actually deliver, which I don't think many people do understand, and I think there needs to be a lot more promotion about it. We're also, starting next week, doing the widest scale financial wellbeing survey that's been carried out in Nuneaton and Bedworth, which we're doing with the localities team from Warwickshire County Council and in partnership with Nuneaton and Bedworth Council. And this is asking members of the public about how they deal with their finances, how they manage their finances, how they're managing, how is this affecting their health and well-being, what sort of support would they like, if they're going to have, if they do want support, where would they like to access that support. There was a small-scale survey last year, was run in Stockingford by the localities team from Warwickshire County Council, and it was only 60 people that were surveyed in a very short time. But 58% of those people said if they had a financial issue or a debt problem, the first port of call would be the CAB. So that sort of shows you that your constituents, our local community, often call to us, to our door first if they have a debt or financial problem or a benefits problem. So I see it as, I have to say, in Rugby, these things have sort of stabilised themselves out, but I do believe that we are different communities, Rugby and Nuneaton and Bedworth, you know? And we have got much more people who are on benefits, many more people who are disabled and who are struggling with things like filling in forms and especially doing them online. and you know, there will be a lot more intensive support needed over the months to come. I would like to say also, because I don't want to forget this because it's really important, thank you very, very much for the funding that you do provide to the CAB service. It's our 80th birthday next year, and we have been providing advice in this borough in one form or another for 80 years. So you know, we've helped generations of local people to overcome their problems. And your money, along with Warwickshire County Council's money, that's what I call our core funding, helps us to attract in other money. From the Money Advice Service, we get £84,000. We get some money from the European Social Fund and the Big Lottery Fund, £167,000 last year. Your money helps us to attract other money to bring added value services to the people of this borough. And you know, if we weren't working with Carver and with Warwickshire Employment Rights, we all work together. It's a very vibrant sector. All the people who volunteer in the Bureau, there's 50 of them in Nuneaton and Bedworth, of which about 45 of them are fully trained volunteers that have gone through training of up to six months to get to where they are to give generous advice. They're fully committed people from the local communities, from living around with you in your communities, who feel passionately about what they do and are giving their services 2 days a week for free. Sorry, did I get some of you?
Yeah, you did. Yeah,
I went on a bit of a run there, didn't I?
Good sales pitch. But Chair, if I can just make a couple of comments as well. I mean, it's not been 80 years, but it's nearly 30 years since I helped campaign to get the CAB into the accommodation that's still in now. That was the old Market Tavern in Bedworth. And you know, it's moved on from Bedworth CAB to encompass more of Warwickshire, and it's a fantastic thing. Going back to the actual issues, Chair, I'd actually written down, because when David mentioned about it in regards to the universal credit, I know I'm sort of going on about that, but I think it's really important, is that there hasn't been a lot of comparison because it's not been there, it's new. And you know, and it'll be monitored closely in the future. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what happens with that, but not in the sense that I'm guessing that it's going to be worse. I hope I'm not being over cynical with that, but the way things are moving on, it is. I'm also interested in, because David's team, I'm assuming, see the whole range of problems from young people to old people and everything in between. And it's interesting because you often hear this, a recent survey said, actually, Bedworth, and you know, it's mentioned in the report, Bedworth, because of its nature, is calling more on the services than any other ward, particularly in Bedworth. But it was interesting to see that Bedworth has got this, within the borough, there's the second highest median age range. I think it's 43.9. And Camphill is somewhere around, I can't remember the exact figures, but 26 years of age, something like that. And the reason I say that is, all these things that we're talking about now should be able to direct the council to identify areas that have got different types of need. And if you look at Bedworth, it's a very diverse ward. You've got the town centre, you've got one end that's fairly affluent, but then the other end that clearly isn't. And you know, if we can start to direct our support and things like that. Yeah. The age one's an interesting one because now that the government agencies are asking more and more, well, they're demanding it, and I know with employment offices and that, you have to do things online. Maybe that's not so much for elderly people, but because we've got an older age range in Bedworth anyway, there's more people that won't be able or want to do things online.
They come to
They
our
want that face-to-face thing. So we need to focus things in a different way and direct our council budgets accordingly. Because going back to the universal credit thing, this isn't necessarily a question for CAB people, but from what I can make out, one of the biggest issues around it and in regards to rent arrears, both whether it be the private sector or the council, is from when they removed that ability for the claimant to be able to pay directly to the landlord, whether it be private or that. And I think that's why we're getting it, because there's a lot of people aren't able to manage the money in that proper way. I mean, I'll ask David if he agrees with that statement, but to me that's why we're getting more rent arrears, because, I mean, I can remember when we used to have appeals panels here and we used to sit and listen to them now. But the ability, for some, let's be honest, if you're in a rented property and you've only got a certain amount of money, the first thing that you're going to do is feed your kids and whatever, and then you're going to kind of think you're going to be able to sort out your rent or your council tax, whatever comes back. And it is a real concern for me, Chair. And I don't really apologise for repeating myself, because it is that important.
Well, I think, if I may, to say that I think we've got a good opportunity approaching us now, because we're doing a lot of work internally. The financial inclusion officers in the council are doing a lot of work. There is a lot of cross referral between ourselves, and there's a new referral form that's been introduced, which from September, which is a multi-agency referral form, which is going to help direct people who come into the council to the right services if it's an outside service that the clients require. So I think there is an opportunity here for us to shape services where we do work together on financial inclusion, debt, and financial education, to find the best solutions for clients, and that we ought to take that opportunity. I totally agree with Councillor Hancock that we ought to be looking at this in more depth at the statistics we do. I don't want to make comparisons with other councils, because I don't think that's fair, but I will just say that in Rugby they have got a guy who really does like our statistics, and he gets hold of them and we give him loads, and he suddenly says, do you know, your statistics are telling us something which we thought, but this proves the point that we need to target some of our services into X, and this sort of backs that up, and then you can sort of target your resources more successfully using that sort of approach, and that's working really well. I'd like to see that happening here as well, which is what Bill was saying.
Can I just make one final point?
Okay.
And it's important, because it was mentioned earlier by a gentleman at the back, the member of our staff. And it was, it's about how you engage with people, and not everybody wants to come into the council offices, not everybody wants to go to the CAB and the problems. And more recently, just as an example, we had an event in Bailey Park in Bedworth, where we actually had a stall that was staffed by people from here that was able to help people on just a pop-in basis, that we could speak informally to people. And we need to be looking at more things about how we can engage with people rather than in a formal setting.
And we are actually doing more of that, this pop-up sort of stuff, going out into the community, just talking to people. We are, another thing, a bit of a headline news, we're getting some additional funding of Warwickshire County Council. It's taken a long time to get it, but we found it, to put some resource in, some advice resource into the new children and family centre hubs across Nuneaton and Bedworth. So that's starting from October, and we're really looking forward to that. And that will be to give generous advice and financial inclusion work. So, financial education, doing courses, and also one-to-one help and support for people.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I do take a professional interest in this particular subject, and you're quite right. It's one of the first, when I have a customer that I deal with at the court, I can't give advice, I'm professionally bound not to. And one of the first places we say to them, have you tried the CAB? And it's one of the first places you go, and the CAB is a most valuable source of support. Most recently I've been dealing with one of your counterparts further on in the south, Helen Knight.
Yes.
And she's very good, very knowledgeable and very tenacious. And some of the information that she's given, and I think other councillors would find it interesting if they went into a bit more depth about the actual mechanics about some of the things that go on. I mean, she was telling me through another forum all about these online passports and things which now go on with universal credit, and how if claimants use them correctly and how they're intended, they can be as much a sword as a shield, because they are more of a real-time update on how things are going and enable the other authorities who need to use that information to actually have that. And I think that's part of the dissemination of the information we need to get out there. And also about, and Councillor Hancock's mentioned about the direct payments towards the landlords, and that is something which wasn't very well known about, but I know through the CAB and Helen Knight was telling me, those facilities are now available to pay direct to the landlord. You have to request them, but they can be done. And that is, again, something which we need to get across. But what we have to remember is universal credit, and no one's going to pretend it's perfect. I'm certainly not going to pretend it's perfect, because I see some of the impacts that it has through the door. But the purpose behind it is to encourage more people to take more sense of personal responsibility as to their own finances. Many people, and this has been successive governments, have enabled people to fall into a cycle of dependency on the welfare state, and when they come out, they're lost. And that's where all these other third sector agencies come on board. And it's like trying to turn an oil tank around at sea. When you've been fixed into a particular mindset or a particular system of doing things, and you have a complete change, it's probably the biggest change in benefits in a couple of generations that we're seeing going on at the moment, and it will take time. And it is unfortunately having some very difficult endpoints which it's causing, but the ultimate place we have to get to is making people more independent, and enable them to manage their own finances and live in the real world, and getting into employment. That's the ultimate thing, because those who are in employment get far more out of the system if they actually work and engage and have a sense of purpose and a reason to get up in the morning. Most statistics and most surveys have shown that. And that leads on to the other point I wish to raise, Chair, which is employment is vital, and the report that we have before us on Warwickshire Advice Rights, Employment Advice Rights Service, is even more damning of this council's decision, full council, to withdraw the funding from them. We had the report before the old economic panel, which showed categorically that the amount of money we pay in, we get coming back into this borough tenfold through the payments they get through either going to out-of-court settlements or in-court settlements, and bringing those payments back into the borough. I mean, I think one of the case studies in here is they got £25,000, I think it was, because of wrongful dismissal and discrimination on the basis of her pregnancy. That's one case, but £25,000, what she brought in that one case was twice what we pay in, or paid in, to Warwickshire Advice Rights. And I think we have cut off our nose despite our face in doing that. If you look at the statistics which have been put together in this report, 47% of what Warwickshire Employment Advice Rights does, or did, is reliant on what this council does. And we have pulled out the rug from under that organisation, and more importantly, the people it supported. And CAB can continue doing this, but it only takes, and I think the report is 19% There's a great difference between the two. CAB will not pretend they are employment rights specialists.
Yeah, we're generous.
You have some expertise, but when it comes to taking a case to Employment Tribunal, you aren't specialists. That's where you need Warwickshire Employment Rights and people like them who can actually take up the baton and go and help those people. And we have taken that facility away, and we have been very short-sighted. And I was one of the ones that led the campaign on this when it went through Cabinet and through full council. I make no apologies about that, and I think it was a political decision which was made, which was evidenced by the outburst of then Councillor Harvey, who had to go across the chamber to the person in the gallery just because he happened to turn from a Labour to a Conservative activist. And that is damning, and you can read what you like into that, but I think it was a political decision against someone the then leader did not like because of what he'd done in terms of his political decisions. So I would like to move as a recommendation, Chair, to ask the Cabinet to reconsider as a matter of urgency the decision to withdraw the funding to Warwickshire Employment Rights Service, given the benefit it provides to the borough.
Can I find a seconder?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Okay, okay. Councillor Watkins?
Yeah, I've got several things to say. Surprisingly enough, have we? Warwickshire Carver. Again, asking for the different activities that go on in Warwickshire Carver. You need every member to know what goes on in Warwickshire Carver building.
It should, I was just gonna, sorry, Councillor, I was just going to say, I've got copies, it should have been attached to the report and it will go out when the as well.
Every member needs to know what other activities, so that they know it's not just Warwickshire Carver building, there are other things that goes on there. Every member needs to know who they can direct to that building. Citizens Voice Bureau. Right. Your promotion things, it would be good if we could all have some posters or something so we can direct somebody to, in different wards we've got community boards, we can put something called things like that. Just looking at your contacts, right, and I can't see anything on there that says European.
That's
or
right.
have I missed it?
ESIF, it's European Social Fund.
No, we're talking about the people that come to
Yeah, new contacts by ethnic
Oh,
origin.
sorry. Yeah. That
or is that coming under not recorded?
new contacts by ethnic origin. Is that?
Yeah.
Now we've got.
I think they come under white. That's just the first part of the report. It does go deeper and we can give more.
I mean, it might have come under not recorded. I don't know. I'm just asking the
I
question.
think it comes under. Is it missing off there? Or is the white other all mixed up? But I can give you that statistic. Actually, I can do a better report than that, a more deeper report that breaks it down to the country that is their origin. And things, so I can get more information to you.
I think what's important, Councillor, is that we do seem to be able to touch on most people who live in our community, whatever their ethnic background. And I mean, and that includes travellers. We took some time actually to break into the Nepalese community, but now that we have, and we've got some successes for them, they use us, and it's great to see them coming into our advice sessions and asking for the help that they need. So, I think we do touch across, and we do certainly see a lot of people from with Polish backgrounds and Eastern Europeans. And
yeah, I was just curious because it wasn't on there.
Yeah.
It just looked like you
I'll make sure the next
because
report
if you're having difficulties in getting into them communities, and then how lose your map. The other thing is, how are you getting these people through? Are they phoning? Are they coming to your shop or whatever? How do you get your clients?
Mostly, our clients prefer. We did a big survey last year, which we asked clients that came into our offices. We asked clients, we asked the community out in the streets, and wherever we could get information from, where they would prefer to access their advice, whether it be through face-to-face contact, telephone, email, web chat, and 79% of the people we surveyed, and it was an extensive survey across Nuneaton and Bedworth, said they would prefer to have advice face to face, not by telephone. When we do get people phoning us up on the telephone, it's generally about things because they're at work and they come out at lunchtime and they've had a row with their boss in the morning, something like that, and they've only got a limited amount of time. But generally, people like to come in, they like to sort of sit down, spread out their papers, throw their bills at you and say, we need this sorting. So if
I've got a problem, I can just come to your place, walk in, I don't need an appointment.
No, not for the initial assessment, you don't.
Just come in, see you. And so every day you've got people coming in to...
Yeah.
And that's 79%-ish.
79%, 78, 79, 80% of people we deal with face to face, yeah.
Okay. And just to clear things up on the Warwickshire employment rights, we haven't lost that, it's still here, isn't it?
The organisation still functioning?
Yeah, so it's still here. The Borough has not lost it yet. Okay. Just to clear that up, because it keeps getting said that we've lost it. We've not lost it, have we?
It's still operating?
Yeah.
Mrs. Ross?
Okay. I think it's incredibly important to support Warwickshire employment rights because in the past, those of us who were in work or were still in work had probably got union protection who would have looked after us in cases of industrial tribunals and so on. But nowadays, employment is it's just a nightmare for a lot of people. And when you look at things like no contract hours and so on, it must be horrendous for people. They have no future, they have nothing at all to turn to. So I think to have somewhere like Warwickshire employment rights is it's a must. It really must support this. And I would be very disappointed if we lose it.
Councillor Walmsley?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points to make. I think it's really important to contextualise actually that since its rollout, Universal Credit's got 200,000 more people into work, and that actually we've had 1,000 people per day returning to work since 2010 on average. So I think that's important to contextualise. And one of the things I think that's really important to look at is that we've ended this cliff edge of virtually no support after you end up 16 hours in employment. So we're having taper out rates off instead. What I think would be really helpful specifically on the section C 52, which looks at the sort of detail of the categories and support numbers. First of all, I'm assuming that is people with issues, so that would be contact. So if somebody has an issue that covers 3 or 4 boxes, I'm assuming there would be 1 in each box, so to speak. So that was not necessarily the number of clients, but the number of issues you've received, which could be 3, which one client could have 3 or 4 items.
On our new reports, that's broken down. There is clients and issues now, so you've got the two different totals there.
Thank you. And I think the other thing that could be incredibly helpful actually is to look for comparators to year-on-year comparisons as well in the report, because, and it touched actually on something that Councillor Hancock said, Universal Credit is new. So we don't actually know whether we compare to a period pre-Universal Credit, where this 612, for example, or how many of those may have been having issues previously that have moved almost in one sense, moved from box number 1 to box number 2, which may be as touching on issues that Councillor Wilson raised, rather than perhaps those to do with the system. And I think that's something that we can really would be really helpful to contextualise. So I don't know if you've got anything
What we're
offhand.
doing here, what you've got in front of you really, is we're responding to the questions that were asked from Nuneaton and Bedworth for our council for our contract, but we can give you a lot more detail than that.
On the new reporting, on the new reporting system, I've done the first one. It has got that more fuller information, hasn't it? Yeah, it's got wards, it's got all the individual wards and the type of issues that they're having in each ward. So you can see that one ward's getting more debt and others not the, so you can see what's happening in your constituency. We are giving much more detail now than what you're asking.
And just to clarify, that will be, so that's a new report that we're reporting from this financial year. So for quarters 1 and 2, and at the next scrutiny panel, that's the format, and the information will be slightly adjusted. So you'll have a different look, which will pick up those elements.
Yeah, 'cause that's very helpful, because I wouldn't want anyone in this committee to be perhaps spreading fake news from last night's expressions. The other question, just to touch on as well, is, and this may be looking at projections forward, but as we all know, Warwickshire Employment Advice Rights, the funding to them was effectively half the revenue stream was suddenly gone. Have we seen a pick-up through the CAB in the number of cases, perhaps an early indicator? Are we going to get far more maybe in legal or employment coming forward in future? Because have you been seeing an increase in that? Because we know these numbers were being seen by Warwickshire Employment Advice Rights. They've got to be going somewhere.
They're still being seen by them.
They're still there.
They are still there, so we're not having an impact on that at this time. But if they weren't there, it's where would people go after that, I think would be the question. We can take them to a certain level on generous advice. There's other information out there that people can do for taking it forward themselves. There's no other, in the area, I don't think there's any other employment help around. But, you know, we can take people to a point. That's what we're funded for, generous advice, but then beyond that.
Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got one question for David. But first of all, I just want to comment on a statement about work giving you a sense of purpose and reason to get up in the morning. Because I had a conversation with a few mums who were really hurt by that comment, because they have because it's been bandied about before, they have a sense of purpose and a reason to get up in the morning, looking after their disabled husband or children, or picking up the slack through CAMS by volunteering in the community with children's mental health, and volunteering in the hospice. They have a sense of purpose and a reason to get up in the morning, and I think it's really important that they are feeling quite offended by hearing that comment over and over again. But my question to David is, could you please just expand on the travel and transport on page 52? What kind of issues are coming up with travel and transport, please?
Oh, so these
I started to talk with radio. It's mainly around blue badge, getting blue badges. It's travel and transport. That's really the hospital transport, minimal, but yeah, that's a part of it. The biggest part is blue badge. I suppose the parking fines, they come under legal, so that will come under the travel, but it is mainly some of the travel as well. It's about getting travel costs to tribunal hearings for appeals. Yeah, some people get paid, but other people are struggling. They come to advice and ask where they can get that help. They don't realise that they can request taxis to the venues and so forth. So we help them with that, and that's what that.
Can I just say as well, going back to your point just before, Candice, earlier, that this breakthrough project, which we're part of and which we lead, which is a European funded project, is helping people who are economically inactive or unemployed. And we've had some research done with some of our clients, and the feedback from Aston University, and also a focus group. And I'll send you a copy of this report, because it actually talks about people like that you describe, and how their world is sometimes, they feel pressurised because they're being forced towards the universal credit, but actually, as you say, they're looking after disabled dependents or relatives, etc., etc. So they feel certainly stigmatised, but they're also, in some cases, their world is spun out of control so much, that by giving some intensive support beyond advice and beyond sorting out their debts and their financial issues, but helping them with life skills and things, has actually helped them in many, many ways to sort their lives and to feel much more confident about going forward, whether that be into work or whether it's just about being at home and doing the things that they do at home. And so it's an interesting report, and it's got some I forget what they say, statistically significant results. That's the word, which is good.
Yeah, members of the panel?
One more question.
Okay, Councillor.
Just one more question, which I suppose that will happen. Warwickshire Employment Rights Service. So it's Warwickshire wide. What other towns in Warwickshire give them funding?
No other districts fund them, so it was us and the county council.
It was us and the county council, that's it. Okay, and the county council is still giving money.
The county council's, Councillor Watkins, I can answer that one perhaps, is that we hold, in other words, we lead another contract holder for the advice services for Warwickshire. But in other words, the funding that comes from Warwickshire County Council, which is for all the Warwickshire Citizens Advice Bureaus, but also the other organisations in that contract is Warwickshire Employment Rights.
Right,
so the money comes into us and then we pass it on to them.
There's no other town in Warwickshire.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from that, the report that we had before the Economic Committee just before the Budget Council showed statistically that 91% of all the people who use Warwickshire Employment Advice Rights reside in Nuneaton and Bedworth. Why would you ask Stratford to pay for 91% of external people from their borough to pay to have advice? You wouldn't. It is quite rightly the function of this council to support its residents, 91% of its residents, and using the money from Warwickshire County Council to top up anyone else who is extraneous from that. And they are probably from people who are just over the border, like just over in Hartsill or in Arley, or just over the border in the rugby jurisdictions as well, or maybe even on the Coventry borders, because we go in there too. You wouldn't ask us to pay for facilities in Stratford, so why should they pay into our facilities?
Yeah. There's, thanks, Panel, for that. I would like to ask a couple of questions before I actually go into to the motion that's been suggested, etc. And I've known David for many moons, and
20 years this year since I became the manager of Citizens Advice in Bedworth. Yeah, well, on Christmas then. If I ask that.
As well, as I said, many moons. You all dive them up. There's part of your summation you were saying there about the blue badges, because the blue badge system changed, didn't it, very recently, and it makes people harder in order to get the blue badges. Is that correct?
I have to admit, I can't give you that answer right now. I'll have to go back to the office and talk to the team to find out.
Okay, I'll just...
I know that we deal with it. I think we just get so used to dealing with things, we don't realise the difficulties. But I'll check that and come back to you.
And well, not as an aside, but as you've got council officers in front of you, and the last things that we were talking about was forms, filling in forms, etc. Do you have a liaison with the Borough Council to say that these forms are too complicated, or they should be plain English, or they should be more simple? But I understand, presumably, that a lot of this is on the internet now, and they've got to be prescribed. If that's right, prescribed information and forms has got to be out there. Are you available to assist and perhaps even change those prescribed forms in order to...
Are you talking about any kind of...
Any kind of form?
Yeah. We feed back to the national office all the time, our national organisation, and they then try to talk to the right departments and so forth to get changes made. So we are feeding in all the time.
I mean, I think the way I look at some of our work these days, which is really to help the most vulnerable people in our community, is that, you know, national government and local governments strive to get everybody to do the things digitally, online, filling in forms, this, that, and the other. It's all there. That's fine. That perhaps as much as 80% of the people in our community will eventually be able to get there and do that, but there will always be, I reckon, at least 20% of people who will never be able to do that, and who will always need the help and support of people like ourselves to help them fill in the disability benefit form, to be able to help them to apply for things online. And also, the other awful thing that people come into us about all the time is these dreadful national helplines that they can never get through to people, you know? Or if they do get through once and then they get cut off, they go back through, they get somebody else who doesn't know what they have to start again. And I did hear somebody who is a DWP officer saying, well, it doesn't really matter if you haven't got a mobile phone or your own phone, but you want to apply for universal credit because you can still use a public phone box. Unbelievable, isn't it? Unbelievable. They haven't even got doors on them now. Your papers would be flying away, wouldn't they?
So thanks for that, and thanks for the contribution today. There's I, as well as many others, thank you for everything you turn around and do. I'm not going to ask you any more questions. I'm just going to go into the motion and what is in front of us today. There's I, for one, will not accept any criticism from a government who actively promotes trade unions are not trade unions within workforces, so they don't have the specialist and the various other things that they had are right in the past. I'm not going to accept anything along the lines of a government who has 0 hours contracts where people who actually are working are using food banks in order to supplement the work that they're doing in order to feed their family, because they can't get anything more than 2 or 3 days a week, perhaps a month, and then you've got to go through the process time and time again. And then, regard to the motion that's in front of us, I and others in the past voted with the Cabinet and full Council to not increase or to reduce the money given to the motion, and I shall inform the panel just now that when the motion is coming up, I shall vote against it. Councillor Wilson, would you like to put your motion in front of the panel?
It's to ask the Cabinet to reconsider as a matter of urgency the decision to withdraw the funding to Warwickshire Employment Rights Service given the benefit it provides to the Borough. In so doing, I'd like to call for a recorded vote, please, Chair.
I would just about take the words out your mouth. I was going to say a recorded vote as well.
I will move an amendment to that proposal, in that the issue of funding to Warwickshire Welfare Rights Service is taken as an item for the budget 2019.
Is that thing a second?
We're in year 18 now.
Next year's budget.
There's a final second or so afterwards. Councillor Hancock. I thought you indicated that, sorry.
I did, it wasn't...
I know. I'm saying I know I had a seconder, so...
Yeah. Chair, I want to say, well, from a personal point of view, you know, we're here to scrutinise things and also have an overview of various things. And I actually see no purpose what can come out of the motion that's been proposed. No real purpose. It's been that recently done and the decision taken that it's too close to it. And despite the conspiracy theories that we have about it being a political decision, Chair, and I'm speaking personally, the way I see it, it was based on the budgetary requirements of this council. You know, you can have all the conspiracy theories you like, and there's a number of people that like to have them. But I'm basing mine on the issues around the budgets of this council that have been slashed by the government. Now, I'm trying not to get into a political argument, but I'm sorry, I've been led into it by members of the party opposite. And so, let's be honest, it was done because of the budget situation in the last budget. Unless the government is going to suddenly pump more money into us, the budget is only going to get into a worse position, yet we're asking to put money back into it. So I'm sorry, purely on those basic grounds, on budgetary levels, I can't support that motion that's been recommended to Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Grant.
Yes, well, I don't see how this is pointless at all when the objective of the motion is exactly within the the recommendation.
Councillor's entitled to his opinion. Councillor Momsley.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Wilson's motion is absolutely spot on. We've heard from CAB tonight themselves, who say very clearly that actually, should the organisation fall, of which we contributed nearly 50% of the money towards them, then there wouldn't be anywhere else to turn. And as Councillor Hancock's references the budget, it's quite clear that we have moved motions at full council as a party that we could get rid of Pravda. The In Touch, the one that can't even align with major decisions like the Borough Plan, that would actually cover the same money to do so. And so I'll be supporting Councillor Wilson this evening in the motion.
I'm getting a bit confused because in Bedworth we actually get another document that says "In Touch" on it from a political party, so you get rid of that one as well. Okay, that's fair enough.
It is in
Councillor Bowman.
Chairman, I mean, I've heard several things tonight. I've heard that CAB haven't picked up the slack. I've had that the welfare rights people are still continuing to support the population in this town. I've heard that CAB provides some funding to welfare rights. Was that right?
No, County Council.
County Council.
And it comes to us and then we pass it on to them.
Well, I understood before we took the vote at full council that Warwickshire had withdrawn all its funding many years ago, and that the form of funding it now gets is totally different from when it was first set up and had Warwickshire in its title. So there's a lot of confusion in my mind as to what is now happening with Warwickshire welfare rights.
Excuse me,
Are they continuing?
I think there is a bit more confusion that we're putting into the equation here. There is an organisation called Warwickshire Welfare Rights Advice Service, which is called we call RAS, and there's Warwickshire Employment Rights Service, which is the one run by Mike Bannister, which used to be called Advice Rights. Before that, the Unemployed Workers Centre, I think. Yeah. That's the one that's the employment rights one. The RAS service was the specialist benefit service, which Warwickshire County Council used to fund to them, which in the last round of the grant contracting.
They withdrew it from that agency?
We got it.
Oh, you got it?
Yes.
So the agency that we're talking about lost that funding?
Warwickshire Welfare Rights Service is a different thing. Yeah. But people are sort of saying, well, we're talking about Warwickshire welfare rights. You're talking about Warwickshire employment rights.
Right. So employment rights, Chairman, is still continuing at the moment.
It is.
It's dealing with its clients and so on without this money. Now, I don't understand how that comes about, because the whole implication here is that we, by withdrawing funding from them, will cause it to collapse. Well, I don't understand that, and I think that if there is at the very least something attached to this proposal that produces a report of their present condition and what their future looks like being now, because we don't know if we're going to throw money back into a pot that's already been filled.
I've got two more speakers and I intend to take the vote. Mrs. Ross, you want to speak to that?
I was just saying, we seem to be able to find money to clean up after the travellers. Why can't we continue to, support this very, very vital, vital service?
And regardless whether we support it or not, we're still going to have to clean up after the travellers.
Councillor
Tandy, last speaker.
I think that there would be plenty that people had to say if we didn't find the money to clean up after the travellers. But at the end of the day, we are talking here about trying to revise in this committee, in this overview and scrutiny committee, a budget decision that was made in February. What's that? A matter of less than 6 months ago. Chair, I'm quite happy to refer it, leave my resolution on the table, or my amendment on the table, that it's left until the next round of budget discussions. either that or I will vote against, and I will then, Chairman, look forward to reading about it on Facebook when I get home.
Point of order, Chair.
Point of order, come on.
The resolution isn't changing a cabinet resolution, a council decision. It is asking the cabinet to reconsider. Therefore, the decision lies with cabinet whether it does so or not, and then refers it on to full council. There is nothing which is actually going against the budget resolution which was passed on the 14th of February. If Councillor Tandy wants to do that and actually change the budget resolution, she'll have my full support because it goes further than my motion.
Right, it's Councillor Tandy's motion has not been seconded once again, so that falls. So we go to the vote, and it's a recorded vote, Wendy.
Councillor Beaumont.
Against.
Councillor Croft.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
Against.
Councillor Glass.
Against.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor Guttridge.
For.
Councillor Hancock.
Against.
Councillor Panda.
For.
Councillor Rudkin.
Against.
Councillor Sargent.
For.
Councillor Tandy.
Against.
Councillor Walmsley.
For.
Councillor Watkins.
Against.
And Councillor Wilson.
For.
Same.
Tied vote. Chairman's cast a vote. I'll vote against. So, thanks, David and Denise and Abby coming along, and I'm sure we'll see you in the not too distant future. Okay, thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Right, we're going to item number 7, formal complaints and the freedom of information request. Oh, actually, say that.
The report in front of you has got information around the total number of formal complaints recorded by service area from the 1st of April to 31st of July 2018, and the percentage responded to or acknowledged within 10 days. It also presents the total number of FOI requests recorded by subject area for the same reporting period and the average days to respond. So, in terms of formal complaints, there are, in that period, 334 formal complaints recorded, which is an average of 84 per month, with an average response rate of 91.3%. And the table 5.2 shows those by service area. That compares to an average of 55 complaints per month for the year 2017-18, where the response rate was 82%, so it shows an improvement in response rate. The new customer feedback process, which went live on the 1st of September, made some improvements, made some changes, and that's obviously shown an improvement in the response rate and the recording of complaints. Just for information, there's 2 reports that get provided to complaints officers and the work in terms of complaints and FOIs, and that goes out on a monthly basis, so officers can see the status and deal with outstanding both complaints and FOIs. For the freedom of information requests, for that same period, 242 have been recorded. That's an average of 61 per month, and that compares to 50 per month for the previous year. Unlike complaints, all FOI requests are acknowledged automatically. And the average day to complete a response is 15 days compared to the previous reporting period, which was 18 days. Once again, the table at 7.3 gives you the FOIs by service area, the total number by service area, and also the average number of days to complete the request. I'd just like to say on that average number of days to complete, there's often information goes between the council and the person making the request if it's going to take longer or there's an exemption on the information, so there's often contact made during that time. And that's the report.
Okay. We have 2 speakers. Michelle Condicott.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few bits that I want to say. I find it very strange that the report says number on the complaints, number responded to or acknowledged in 10 days. I would hope that all complaints are acknowledged immediately, i.e. within a day, and that this is actually how long it took, for them to respond to. I'm actually more concerned really with the freedom of information requests and things, because my experience is extremely poor. Over the past 2 years, I've put in 4 requests to this authority, and not a single one of those has been answered in time or without me having to sort of send it back and say, well, you haven't actually answered the questions I put and things. And the most recent one, I suddenly realised after about 40 days that I hadn't had any response, and and then it still took them another week, and they were just quite simple things that should have been there at the drop of a hat. But I noticed on both the complaints and the freedom of information requests that waste management seem to be performing particularly badly. Is this related to having them being moved? Is it related to poor staffing issues? Or do they just not understand how the system works? Because it seems very, very odd to me. In terms of the FOI things, my feeling is that most people within quite a number of people within the council don't seem to actually understand about what freedom of information requests are all about and things. I've had to keep chasing. And on one, when I got it back, and I thought, well, this hasn't actually answered the questions I asked. And then it was sent back, and then I was given another number, and it was then went through as another freedom of information request. It wasn't. It was the same one. And so, some of these figures, I don't know sort of how they tally, because some of the time scales are very, very poor. So I just hope that the system is improved dramatically and things, because they should all be done well within the 21 days. I have asked things from other authorities. Leicestershire, I got response back within a week. North Warwickshire, I asked something, I didn't even ask it under the FOI, but they treated it as an FOI, and again I had it within about 2 days. We seem to be performing particularly badly on this, so I do hope that there's a bit more training of staff and can get your act together, basically. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Condicott. Oh, sorry. Is there any matters?
Points of clarification.
Points of appeal. Sorry. Okay, thanks.
Right, on page 61, it says the number of complaints has gone up to 84 a month from 55 a month. That is actually a good thing, because any organisation needs feedback, and I hope this new system isn't actually showing we've got 50% more problems, but actually we're recording them better. So I'm not worried by the numbers going up. What I am worried about is the massive difference between departments. So we've got planning and building control only gets 2% of the complaints this council has. And with the borough plan, planning applications and all the things this borough does with planning and planning policy and development control, I can't believe the number is 6, i.e. 2 per month, when we're on hundreds over the 3 months for some of the other facilities. So I fear the recording of complaints is not always consistent. And as we have waste here quite often, they tell us quite a lot of time they over-report. So if anything's could be a complaint or a service request, quite a lot of things do get over-reported as complaints. Whereas I really cannot believe only 2 people a month are unhappy with what's going on in this council. On freedom of information stuff, I used to do a lot of freedom of information requests, and one of the things that happens is some of them just get lost in the system. So average days to complete and all this stuff. Do we actually know if there are any complaints on freedom of information requests that are never actually responded to? Yeah, it gets passed around, the person loses the authority. Yeah, do we actually have a nice spreadsheet with these are the 242 requests and actually see how many are actually open forever? Because we have this in housing. If a void house is never filled, it never adds to the statistics. So if a freedom of information request is never actually responded to, does it actually come on the average? Yeah, it is effectively a check done at the end to make sure all closed down. Thank you, Chair.
Any points of clarification for the Councillor? Councillor Bullock?
I'd like to ask Councillor Condacourt if he realises that planning and building control work with the client, and that if the client has a problem, there's always a dialogue and there is a commitment to a successful conclusion to a planning application that's written into their terms of reference. So I don't see how complaints necessarily indicate anything in terms of the relationship they have with people who are making planning applications.
I would assume that number includes all the citizens who make objections and have to be kept informed as well. And in cases where, say, the planning application and something changes and people aren't informed of the change, yeah, someone's building houses behind you and they've redesigned the plan so the house is now closer, that person may complain because they weren't notified of the change. The customers to planning aren't just the developers, they're also all our citizens who put in planning objections.
Thanks, Councillor. Any questions from the panel for the officer? Councillor Watkins.
Hello, Chris.
That's surprised me.
How are you? Yeah. Complaints. I'm still not happy with the fact that we send the complaint in, within hours we've got the letter back saying, yeah, it's done, and it's dusted and it's off, when the complaint hasn't been dealt with. I've got several in there, you know I have. And the complaint's still there, and it's going to be there until the job's done. But Parks or whoever will send a letter back saying, yeah, it's dealt with. And so Parks, for instance, 100%. It's always going to be 100%, so 111, 100%, because they'll send a letter straight back. But the fact of the matter is, it's not 100%. So again, I still need that looking at, because I could send you 5 through tonight, whatever. I ain't done well, but I could send them yet. Also, I think all members again need to have some training on sending residents' complaints through, and so that it does get recorded properly, because it is important that it be recorded properly. So if something like that could be offered to all members, so that they know. And just to finish up really, is when members do report it through this system, then it is recorded properly, and there's no difference between a resident and a member councillor. So this is the way to do it. So as you know, I do fully support sending them through this way, but I'm just still not happy with the fact that you get a letter back, and then if that falls off my radar, I've got to keep going back and back checking this stuff. So it's not working.
Christine?
What can I say? I agree with Councillor Watkins in terms of this system, the system that I'm reporting on, I'm giving you the information here, is about the recording of our complaints. And this system is there to support what we do about when somebody complains, so that when or if it goes to the Ombudsman, we have to have gone through a process. And the process we have, which is a stage 1 process where you get a response to the complaint. That is not necessarily, as you've pointed out, where it becomes a service request or it becomes an action that needs to be completed. So the response is around have we undertaken the process correctly, or have we done something that is unfair or unjust. So the response is around those elements. If there is something, and if just taking parks for instance, if something hasn't been, a tree hasn't been attended to, or something hasn't been attended to correctly, the response is we'll always look at, have we followed some sort of, is it part of the programme, should it have been done, should it have not been done, okay? So that would be the response, and that's what's recorded here. We've responded to the complaint and the process. The fact that some action, whether it's in a programme or not in a programme, and therefore hasn't met the person complaining there, what they actually want action to be taken, isn't recorded here. And that's what
that's it. So if I complain about something, I'll get a letter back to say, yeah, it's been dealt with. But if I don't keep track of that, if you go back to it, and it never gets done. And then I was to go, say if I went back to it in say 6 months' time, and then asked for it to be escalated, it can't be escalated because it's out of the time.
It's a new complaint, it would become a new complaint. Because, and then the new complaint would be, well, you said you were going to put it on the programme or whatever, and it's not there, and therefore you're then, okay, you're looking back at why wasn't it put on. So, yeah, and yes, so you could have a whole number of different complaints, but they're all about the same thing, which is what you said. Yeah. That's not what I'm reporting here, which is true.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I might actually shock Chris, but I'm actually rather pleased with how things have been moving, because I have been quite critical in the past about not even responding with an acknowledgement within 10 days. So it's not going to change overnight, get into the perfect state, if such a thing exists. But the fact that we are getting to a position where customers are at least told we have your complaint and we are investigating it, that actually makes the customer feel a lot better in the first instance, knowing you've got it and it's progressing. I know that because of my own work life, and I know what it's like being on the other end, having to process the complaint, because that's tedious as well. But it's important. What we need to start getting better at now, we're moving in the right direction. We now need to take it to the next step, which is actually getting the full report to the customer in a much more timely fashion. And I think that's where we now need to lead a bit more on with the different directorates, because I know I've had some some residents complain to me, I've had my 10-day acknowledgement, but I still haven't had a response 19 days later. Yeah. And that's where the next problem is, I think. I think that's where we need to start addressing. I'm not surprised, actually, that waste management is the area where we aren't hitting the target as much. I think that's mainly because of the nature of the work. I think we still need to make improvements there, but I'm not necessarily surprised that's the area where it's showing. Unlike Councillor Condicott, I'd actually be interested to know what the spike is, if there's any trend in the spike that was referenced in paragraph 5.1. Because it talks about how last year there were an average of 55 complaints per month for the year 2017-18, and it now talks about 84 per month this year. Is there, have you done any data analysis to show where actually that spike is? Is it in waste management because we had a spate of issues with the waste collection between May, early July time, where there are, I think there are about 17 rounds which were cancelled from what we counted? Or is there any other directorate where that's come from?
I would say the spike is within parks.
moving parts. That's quite
It's
interesting.
actually more are being recorded correctly, I would say.
Well, I think it's important to actually. I agree that it's good to have more data to go on. It's good that more people are feeling able to complete the recording correctly. I think we then need to take it the next step and actually analyse what
I
is
would
that
actually
spike.
also say that there are more councillors, quite rightly so, that are coming through the system, and we're getting those recorded correctly.
Thank you. That's interesting.
There's, I've been reminded, or that we're coming up to the 3 hours, which I understand is the length of time for an overview and scrutiny committee to set.
Point of order, Chair. I move that we request an extraordinary meeting of this OSP to consider the remaining items, which I think are incredibly important. I suggest a different meeting on the grounds that actually we've covered 3 out of 8 substantive points so far in 3 hours, and that our continued rate, as we've been told, we couldn't have had a full council after the full council last night was because of officer time and being here too late. I think it'd be unfair to continue this evening, and we need to have an extraordinary meeting to cover the rest.
I'd second that, Chair.
What's the panel's view?
I think
It seems to me that if that's what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen. There's let's have a Wendy and I and whoever have a look at the Constitution and see if we can get an appropriate date and not to just to try and cover the items that are still in front of us. Is that okay? I really want that. So we're going to take this item and finish this item, or do you want to finish it now and continue?
I'll move that we continue this item.
This item. So after that, I'll have to have a look to see about calling a special meeting if that's what the Constitution says. If we've got to do it, well, we'll have to turn around and do it. Right, Councillor Grant, we've got 3 other speakers indicated.
Yes, I just had a couple of queries. First of all, I've never really had a proper answer as to why councillors' complaints and queries are treated differently to members of the public, because as far as I understand, we're all residents in Nuneaton and Bedworth, and we all pay council tax in Nuneaton and Bedworth, so I don't understand why we're treated differently in terms of complaints, as in ours aren't officially treated as complaints unless we specifically ask for them to be. So I'd like an answer on that. And the other one is I'd like to know, because unless I've missed something in the report, there's no answer as to how many freedom of information requests have gone past the 20-day deadline, because I've heard of at least one in this time period that has, so you'd presume that there'd be at least one. And I think that if we're reporting this information quarterly, we also need to report how many have gone over the 20 days quarterly. Don't know if you have that information on hand now.
I don't have that information to hand, although on that, Chair, you did have on the quarterly, on the performance report, you used to get FOIs and complaints. Did you decide not to have that?
I think we asked for a separate report because of let's say historical reasons, shall we say? Yeah.
Yes, please.
They went on to the different scrutinies.
Right.
So housing and communities without fair freedom of information and things like that. So since he's got this,
No, it's not a period at all. I don't know whether perhaps this panel wants that back on the integrated report is quite long already.
There's a panel on the integrated report when the new thing comes up.
Yes,
you used to get the, and then you could see which ones were still outstanding.
I think the reason you asked for it not because you considered it a waste of time.
Yeah, right. I want to let you know.
Okay.
Consider that now.
Consider it.
Okay. I can supply that information, just so you know, the monthly report that goes round to officers that gets produced is a one that goes right back to the 1st of April and shows all the complaints. What I do on a monthly basis is just take off the months and report those to management team on a monthly basis. So each month they know which ones are over the 20 days.
I'd be grateful if you could report that to myself and I'm sure other members think
Well,
it
it
would be
goes to the
interesting.
management team first. What I can produce, I can produce a report. I'd have to anonymise it.
That's
take
fine.
out all the names
Naturally.
and produce that information. There are ones that go over 20 days. I would say that freedom of information requests, certainly in some of the areas, economic development and planning, environmental protection, some of them, they are quite complex, whatever the information that has been requested. We now have a data protection officer in post, which we share with Rugby, who before they go out, make sure that we are, the responses that we are not divulging information that we shouldn't. Because it's got quite complicated with the GDPR and things like that. So it has got a little bit more complicated, and so the FOIs have got, the process has become slightly longer. But in what should happen with the process, I'm not saying it always does, but what should happen is if it's going to go over the 20 days, then you should get a contact that goes out to the person requesting, saying it's going to take longer, and a time frame of when they would expect the response. And I know that doesn't happen, which I think we do have to follow up on. In terms of councillors' complaints not treated the same, they should be being treated the same. If a councillor is bringing a complaint forward on behalf of a customer, a resident, then they will be treated exactly the same, and it's entirely up to the councillor as to whether they want to know the response as well. That would be understood. If a councillor is making a complaint in their own right as a resident, well, you'd be treated the same as a resident. If, however, you're acting as a councillor, then you have different rights as a councillor, because you'll be privy to some information as a councillor that the public wouldn't be privy to. So does that answer?
Sort of. I mean, it's not mutually exclusive for me. I'm both a resident and a councillor.
You are, but you have different rights under that guise. You are, as a councillor, you'll be privy to more information than the public would.
And that's more of an explanation that I've had thus far, so thank you for that.
Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to really pick up on 7.3, the table of the service areas of FOI requests and the average number of days to complete. I think we need to understand, and perhaps I've answered. We've got we've got a 5 out of 19, so virtually a quarter of service areas there that are over the 20-day target set out under the FOI Act. What are we doing to try and get some of those down? Some of them substantially. I mean, 38, 40, 32 days. Some of them aren't small amounts of time over. Some of them are quite double the time set out.
Some of them will be for very legitimate reasons in terms of, as I said earlier, the amount of information that has been asked for. And so it's going to take longer than 20 days, and we can, under the Act, write out and say this is going to take us longer, it's going to take this length of time, so you won't get the response within 20 days. I am absolutely sure that doesn't happen all the time. We're not as good at doing that little bit in between, and that is something that we are going to follow up on in terms of making sure that we respond and give explanations as to why we're taking longer to do a certain thing.
So as a council, we're not necessarily compliant with the legislation at present if we're not
You're
contacting
allowed
20
to,
days.
you're allowed to respond and say this information is going to take me longer.
You are, but you just said before that actually you know that that does not always happen.
That's right. Yeah. So that's
In
what
those
we need
cases,
to do.
in those cases, we're not currently compliant with the FOI
Absolutely.
legislation.
Yeah.
Councillor Elliott. Oh, and the last one is Councillor Hancock.
Thanks,
Of
Chair.
course.
Yeah.
I should write everybody down, you know.
Put the wrong name down, Chair. Chair, I apologise if I've missed it, but through you, Chair, can I ask, regardless of whether it be the numbers under the formal complaints or the numbers under freedom of information. I'm just kind of interested to know, you may not know, but I'm interested to know how many, is it a few people that submit a lot of complaints or freedom of information requests? You know, because if you look at 334 and 242, are they all individual complaints or requests, or is there a nucleus of people that do repeat ones?
No, they're generally individuals. There isn't really a collective apart from perhaps one. We'll remain nameless.
We won't say that.
Otherwise, they are individuals. There's no. If I can put this into context, there are about 80,000 in a year transactions that go through customer services, service requests. And these, as a percentage, well, complaints that is, as a percentage of those transactions is less than 0.8%. So they are individuals that are not happy with the outcome or whatever, or the no action or whatever it is they wish to complain about. I did previously, I have brought to this panel, anonymised again, but information so you can actually see the types of complaints, and they're quite varied. Because at one point I was looking to see whether there was a trend that I could home in on and we could do some service improvement around, but the numbers are so small, they're not statistically significant. That doesn't mean to say we're not taking action over when something has gone wrong.
Chair, can I, finally, because I wanted to come back in, because I wanted to speak about the motion that's been put forward and possibly move an amendment to it. And really, sorry, people are looking mystified. I thought it was suggested that we have an extraordinary meeting of this.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Have I misunderstood? I'm sorry.
I think Chair took it as it was approved by consensus.
I took it, sorry if I'll clarify that. I took it as, if that's what the Constitution says, it lasts 3 hours, and the 3 hours is up, we would have to, by Constitution, call an extra meeting.
Yes, but it was, Chair, I thought the word I heard was an extraordinary meeting. Now, Chair, my issue about it, and perhaps I'll receive some legal advice on it, is the problem I've got with that is that delays the content of this meeting to a needless, not a needless, it's the wrong word, but for too long a period of time, where my interpretation is we're suspending this meeting to be continued at another time. And normally what happens in that case, and this is what I'm going to move if it needs to move, is that the date for the continuation of this meeting, because that's what it is, it's not a new meeting, an extraordinary meeting, it's a continuation of this meeting, is that it be done through yourself as the chair and the officers. That is the way we've always done it. Maybe people will think that's the wrong way of doing it. But it's not an extraordinary meeting, it's a continuation of this, which means, unlike calling an extraordinary meeting, you would have to give notice. It's not, it's a continuation of this meeting, Chair.
And the term is picked because, it's a semantic term, because in the event that you were to adjourn, my understanding is you can not adjourn to another date, you could adjourn for a fixed period of time.
No.
That's under the Constitution.
No. I'll get everything sorted with the Constitution, but as I understand it, and my interpretation was a continuation of this meeting, rather than an extraordinary meeting, which I understand now that may have different connotations within the Constitution. So myself and Wendy and whoever will get together and find out when's the first possible date that we can have this continuation of this meeting. Yeah? Is everybody clear on that? Everybody all right with that? And also, to finish up with this agenda item, the officers have been taking some notes, and it says, actually says in recommendation to provide feedback and comment. The officers got the feedback and comments, and I'm sure that that feedback and comments will be taken up in order for us to get a better service in the future. And saying that, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance tonight, and safe journey back. To be continued.